picture can say 1,000 words. In the world of horror, imagery is important. Whether in the theater of the mind or with an actual image, more horror can be conveyed when an image or video is utilized. In the internet's horror community, there's a decent amount of stories that derive their horror from images. Infamous stories like Jeff the Killer, Slenderman, and Smile Dog are all based on an image, while other stories will use an image to enhance their story after the fact. Hello friends, today we'll be going down the iceberg that is internet image horror. For this iceberg, I've included image creepypastas, image-based internet horror stories, disturbing images, and more. I also want to point out that some of the creepypastas are just about a picture, but don't have a picture attached. I did mostly grab creepypastas with images though. Let's start our descent. Starting off this iceberg with probably the most famous or infamous image creepypasta, here we have dog.JPG. This creepypasta has been making the rounds on the internet since 2008. It was first said to have appeared on 4chan before spreading to the rest of the internet. The true origin of the creepypasta is still not known. The image itself also has no known source. This is something that makes this creepypasta stand out a lot more. We'll talk about that more after the story though. In the summer of 2007, a student, an amateur writer, was trying to conduct an interview with a woman by the name of Mary E. The narrator was looking for something that had been an urban legend he'd heard about many times as a child. According to the narrator, Mary was one of the few people that had first-hand experience with this legend. When the narrator arrived at the residence, Mary refused to leave her room for the interview. Her husband of 15 years tried to comfort her through the door for half an hour before the narrator decided to cut his losses. He did take notes though while listening to her through the door, but most of what he got revolved around incoherent dreams and ramblings. The narrator then explains that in 2005 was the first time he'd heard of Smile.jpg. It was an internet urban legend, and one that he was very interested in. The rumor of the urban legend always pointed to Mary as the survivor of something called SmileDog.jpg. Those rumors aside, there wasn't much evidence of its existence at all. Not online, not on forums, and nowhere you could reasonably expect to find that kind of stuff. The urban legend centered on this picture of a husky in a dimly lit room that appeared to have sharp human-like teeth. It is said that all 400 people, Mary included, that saw the photo originally suffered from nightmares and epileptic seizures. Though there were some photos being spread around 4chan at this time, those were determined not to be the original photo. The most prolific legend around Smile Dog is that it was actually spread through a chain letter with the subject line, "Smile, God loves you." This was a common occurrence for the time, and many didn't really know what chain letters even were. Later the narrator would receive an email from Mary with an apology and some words of advice. She apologized for not talking to him, but also said that she was glad she didn't. She explained that ever since she saw Smile Dog, she would see him in her nightmares. Every night when she did, he would ask her to spread the word. Mary was unsure why it wanted the word spread, or if it would help her in any way if she did. The assumption was that if she spread, it would leave her be. She was even sent a floppy disk with a package with no return address, which she assumed held the photo. Of course she was ready to pass the burden on to the narrator, but backed out at the last minute. She leaves the email with one final warning to not ask others for the image, as they probably won't be as considerate as she is. A month after this email, the narrator was contacted by the husband to say that his wife had taken her own life. He had found that email she sent him and continued with the warnings that she had given. The narrator later verified that she had indeed passed, but didn't mention how. After some time had passed, the narrator would receive an email from someone he didn't know. The email read, "Hello, I found your email address through a mailing list. Your profile said you were interested in Smile Dog. I have saw it. It is not bad, as everyone says it is. I have sent it to you here, just spreading the word." The narrator pondered whether to even open the file attached to the email. Was it the real Smile.jpg? And what if Mary's warnings were true? Would that mean that he would be tormented every night until he spread the word? Would that even work? Would he even be able to spread the word? Yes, he could, and he attached it to the bottom of the creepypasta. This is the original creepypasta that came with the story of dog.JPG. In this story, it's referred to as smile.jpg, but of course the creepy image of the husky is the entity that haunts people. This is probably one of my favorite creepypastas, actually. It was created in 2008 and predates many of the classic era creepypastas, but is by far one of the best. It really shows how good this medium can be for creative horror stories. The story has no author attached, and that anonymous author is what gives it so much intrigue. The image itself also doesn't have a traceable source, which makes it a true mystery. Not only does that add to the story, it also makes it a true urban legend in that case. Many have tried to find the source for the image, but no one has just yet, leaving this as one of the many early internet urban legends. Also, the image isn't alone. It is also said to have an image that can change depending on the viewer. This image is probably one of the most iconic images on the entire internet. This is the original image used for Jeff the Killer, a pretty subpar creepypasta that I won't go into full detail about here, as he's going to be on a different iceberg. I would be remiss for not including it here though, as the image itself has become an internet urban legend. This image even today sends a shiver down my spine. Something about it just digs deep into my subconscious and sets off my fight or flight. I even remember when I first saw this image. That's how much it stuck with me. It was a late night of gaming, and I was just finishing a match of League of Legends with my friends when I decided it was time for bed. It was either midnight or 1 AM, and I wanted to watch some YouTube before going to sleep. At this time I was just starting to find out about the world of creepypastas, and up to this point I'd only been reading the gaming themed ones. I started YouTube on my Xbox 360 and clicked on the first Mr. Creepypasta video that I saw. The next thing I know, this image is on my screen, and I'm listening to the original Jeff the Killer creepypasta. I actually really liked the creepypasta, but I had to stop the video as the image actually scared me. I could blame being tired or that it was just perfect setting for it to creep me out, but I think the image just does that by itself. Now for the origin of the image, well, that's still something people aren't sure about. The origin of the image has had many leads over the years that have died along the way. The biggest is probably the story of a girl that asked if she was pretty on a 4chan board. The girl's name was Katie Robinson, and supposedly she was harassed and bullied by the users. They would eventually edit the photo and keep posting it until it became the famous Jeff the Killer image. This cyberbullying eventually led to her taking her own life. This story was debunked though, and the actual girl behind the photo is still alive and has nothing to do with this rumor. This has led to many rabbit holes of people trying to find out the origin of this photo. Now I could make an entire video out of this subject, but I wouldn't be able to say more than blame it on Jorge already has. If there's a big investigation or an update, then maybe I'll consider it, but until then I'm going to leave this story here. The image is very funny in a way, but also still gives me a quick shiver. The creepypasta withstanding, this image will probably always be part of the internet's urban legends. On May 12th of 2019, this image was posted to 4chan's paranormal board. The accompanying text read, "If you're not careful, and you don't clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you." This was the creation of one of the most interesting internet urban legends, the Backrooms. The Backrooms are some pocket dimension that you can accidentally find yourself in, filled with empty office spaces, fluorescent lights buzzing above, and moist carpet. The Backrooms have taken on a life of their own here on the internet. The mythos of the Backrooms is ever growing. Even now, there are creators adding to the lore of this space. There are ARGs, creepypastas, games, short films, and just about every form of medium that covers the Backrooms. Going too heavily into the mythos and lore of the Backrooms wouldn't really fit with this video. Instead, I just want to take a look at this image attached to the story. This is the Backrooms, as mentioned above. The look fits the text perfectly and really gives off a liminal space horror. It feels unnatural, and like you're not supposed to be there. Much like the Jeff the Killer image, the true origin of the Backrooms image is unknown. There's a lost media wiki page and a group trying to find its origins. There have been many false leads, with many people taking pictures of empty office building spaces that look similar, but the real space hasn't been found just yet. The oldest version of the image was tracked down to 2012, but aside from that, not much is really known. This is honestly one of the greatest parts of the Backrooms, the mystery of the image. Finding it would be a huge victory for internet lost media enthusiasts, but the mystery of it all is far better in the long run. Here's our first short creepypasta that I'll be reading in full. On March 12, 2007, on the B board of 4chan, an anonymous user posted a GIF image. At first glance, strangely the GIF image wasn't animated. It was titled I'm Happy.GIF and showed what appeared to be a drawing of a smiley face, only with realistic looking eyes and a mouth. People who clicked on it saw the smiley face's smile slowly turn to a frown, and the eyes taking on an angrier appearance. The smiley face would then scream loudly, loud enough to burst eardrums, and gruesome images would flash by quickly. After about 5 minutes, it would show the text, "Have a nice day," and then the user's computer would automatically close out of the browser and would stop working, as if a virus had corrupted the hard drive. People whose computers were infected would shortly be found in their homes, skinned and mutilated, with a smiley face painted in blood on the floor next to their corpses. The founder of 4chan, Moot, would always claim that the pictures never existed, and that the murders were unrelated. However, somewhere in the archives, the picture still exists. Most people who attempt to post it are usually swiftly banned by Moot. This one is short, but really good in my opinion. It takes a lot of the usual creepypasta tropes, but doesn't use them super poorly. The images popping up of grotesque imagery is the shock value that I expect from most creepypastas, but the whole thing is so short that it doesn't really hamper the story too much. The ending with the creator of 4chan saying it never existed is probably true. It never did any of these things, but it's still a fun story. Also, I have to mention the part where everyone who saw this image just got straight up murdered, because that is a very extreme claim to make. All things considered, not a bad short pasta. The girl in the photograph is a certified classic in the world of creepypastas. Most people have probably already heard of this one, as it's likely they ran into it in many different places on the internet. It was such a short story that it was perfect for retelling or posting anywhere. I actually first found this story while reading through an app that used to send me short horror stories to read daily. This is one of the first stories I read. The actual story is pretty short, so let me read it in full. One school day, a boy named Tom was sitting in class and doing math. It was 6 more minutes until after school. As he was doing his homework, something caught his eye. His desk was next to the window, and he turned to look at the grass outside. It looked like a picture. When school was over, he ran over to the spot where he saw it. He ran fast so that no one else could grab it. He picked it up and smiled. It had to be a picture of the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen. She had a dress with tights on and red shoes, and her hand was formed into a peace sign. She was so beautiful and he wanted to meet her, so he ran all over the school and asked everyone if they knew her or had ever seen her before. But everyone he asked said no. He was devastated. When he was home, he asked his older sister if she knew the girl, but unfortunately she also said no. It was very late, so Tom walked up the stairs, placing the picture on his bedside table and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Tom was awakened by a tap on his window. It was like a nail tapping. He got scared. After the tapping, he heard a giggle. He saw a shadow near his window, so he got out of bed, walked towards his window, opened it up, and followed the giggling. By the time he reached it, it was gone. The next day, he again asked his neighbors if they knew her. Everybody said sorry, no. When his mother came home, he even asked her if she knew her. She said no. He went to his room, placed the picture on his desk, and fell asleep. Once again he was awakened by a tapping. He took the picture and followed the giggling. He walked across the road when suddenly he got hit by a car. He was dead with the picture in his hand. The driver got out of the car and tried to help him, but it was too late. Suddenly he saw the picture and picked it up. He saw a cute girl holding up 3 fingers. This is a short story that spreads perfectly because of its length. It's one that I often tell my friends who are not aware of what creepypastas are. This one was pretty popular and it still stands today. When you think of creepypasta photos, many of you probably think of the Jeff the Killer image. The image was pretty popular and it's still talked about to this day. One that many seem to gloss over are the original Slenderman photos. Slenderman actually started out as an image creepypasta. There was a contest being held on the Something Awful forums and these Slender photos were submitted by a user named Victor Surge. The images would go on to win the contest and forever cement the Slenderman into the lore of the internet. The photos also had some writings attached to them. This first one said, "We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them, but his persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time." This quote added a little context to the photo, but kept the intrigue of the entity going. The second image had this quote, "One of the few recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken on the day that 14 children vanished, and for what is referred to as the Slender Man. Deformity cited as film defects by officials. Fire at the library occurred 1 week later, actual photograph confiscated as evidence." This quote gives the entity its name and also establishes what it does without giving away too much. The Slenderman would go on to get video games, fanworks, a few ARGs, and generally run the internet until becoming too saturated. There's more to the downfall of Slender, but that can go in a video all by itself. If there's interest, maybe I'll cover him someday. ZALGO, or He Who Waits Behind the Wall, is an entity that I've covered completely in a prior video on my channel. The link to that is in the description. I'll give a basic rundown as he is still an image-based creepypasta at heart. ZALGO came from the mind of a user on the Something Awful forums, much like Slender and others. ZALGO's original lore had him only being able to alter images in comics. These were some of those comics. The comics show the tainting of childhood innocence and create this entity that appears to be almost eldritch in nature. ZALGO is said to have the ability to taint anything that he wishes, be it video, images, comics, or even text. ZALGO is the entity that is prophesied to end the world. "He is ZALGO and he comes" are phrases that are pretty common in the ZALGO lore. The lore may have started with images, but it changed over time. He became more of the ultimate evil that plagued the internet. Everything he touched turned to nightmare fuel. The Portraits is a very short creepypasta that is very well known in the world of internet horror. The story is only 3 paragraphs, but sets up a very creepy premise and delivers on that horror. Since this one is short, I'll again be reading it in full. There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around the inside of the cabin, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by several portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred and malice. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. The next morning the hunter awoke. He turned, blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. Now that is The Portraits, a pretty eerie story that is short and makes you think. Honestly, one of the best short horror stories in my opinion. The idea of a group of strangers staring at you while you're asleep in an unfamiliar place is a great horror premise. The story also doesn't over-explain itself. It gives you what you need to feel the fear and then it ends. I actually have a fear of looking out a window and seeing something staring back. I'm not sure if there's a name for that kind of fear, but I have it. Slideshow is another short pasta, let me just read it. Fingers trembling with excitement, I opened the package. Just as I had hoped, it was the camera I won on eBay. With mild delight, I realized that I had received a better deal than I had planned, because the previous owner had left the memory card in the slot. Before sending an email to the seller alerting them of the mistake, I decided to see if anything was on it. Setting the camera on Slideshow, I watched as the camera displayed a picture of a shipping label. My confusion turned to horror as the next image was of a person brutally murdered. The rest of the card was alternating pictures of mailing addresses, followed by a murder scene. The last image was of the shipping label from the box I had just opened. Straight to the point and creepy. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. There's just some creepypastas that don't leave much room for interpretation, and instead just want to tell you a spooky story. Tower of Silence is a creepypasta that I had to do some background research on. I didn't know what a dogma was, and I wasn't so familiar with the Zoroastrian religion. With that bit of research out of the way, let's get to the story. A group of Indian officials were following leads on missing person reports from a city near the deep jungle. This led them to a Tower of Silence, or dogma. The dogma was a site used to dispose of those who had passed away and was seen as a way of giving back to nature by letting birds and wild dogs eat the remains. This photograph is the only image to come from this particular incident. The weirdness goes deeper though. None of the bodies in this photo were ever identified, and the villagers who had reported missing people stated that these were not those people. Also, the usual birds and dogs were nowhere to be seen. In fact, there was no wildlife aside from flies and maggots. At the center of the tower was a pool of blood that was several feet deep. Even with the blood from every dead body there, it was still more than they'd be capable of producing. The stench that the blood gave off was enough for the officials to never want to return to this particular site. The expedition met with an unexpected end when one of the villagers accidentally kicked a small bone into the pit. The pit then exploded, sending blood and liquid flying out. Those that were covered in the blood were immediately sent to the hospital and quarantined. Those people would later go mad with fever and never recover. Officials later returned to the site with hazmat suits, but were met with an unusual sight. All of the bodies were gone and the blood pit was completely empty. The only evidence of this site's existence was this photograph. Now, this photo is pretty creepy, and if I had not done a little research, this whole site would look alien to me. Of course, with what I know now, I see this as a burial rite, and one that makes sense. The story attached is pretty creepy, and is another short one that leaves you asking a lot of questions. The scariest part of this story comes with the fact that this picture looks so creepy. This picture adds a little evidence to the writing. Of course, the story itself is creepy too, with a strange, almost otherworldly anomaly being found deep in the forest of India. The mystery continues to grow and never gives up any answers, and I think that does well for the story. Our next creepypasta is called Janice.JPG. It's a pretty straightforward story about a man that explores the internet a bit too much. We've all glimpsed the weird side of the internet, but the narrator of this story made it a full-time job. Janice.JPG is a story where the narrator is actually named. His name is Mark Spielman, and he works for the police department. His job was to find illegal websites and direct them to the police. This means that he would have to sit through some of the worst the internet had to offer. After being hired for the job, he got immediately to work finding what the internet tries to hide. His first few assignments were pretty straightforward, until he came upon the website sweet15.com. With a name like that, Mark was pretty sure he'd stumble upon a child predator website. Exploring the website at first seemed promising, but it didn't seem to have a point. The first image he clicked on was titled Kathy.jpg. The picture loaded and showed a girl smiling at the camera. The girl looked to be about 15 or 16, but she looked fine and not in any precarious situation. The one thing that Mark did note as odd was that the name of the picture was now Janice.JPG. Mark clicked back to the main page and followed another link with a different girl's name. Once again, he was back on the same picture of Janice. Every picture that he clicked on led him back to that photo. He even brought in help, and all of them saw that photo over and over again. So far, there was nothing explicitly illegal about the website. It seemed like one big joke was being played on him. He couldn't find anything, and as he was leaving work for the day, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to explore the site more. Mark returned home and couldn't sleep. His mind was racing and he knew what to do. He would have to go to that site again and dig deeper than he had before. He returned to the list of names and scrolled to the bottom. At the very bottom of the list was a file named TrueJanice.jpg. He immediately clicked on the image and saw the same photo from before, but in black and white. Mark covered the picture and found an embedded link. Clicking on it, his computer shut down and gave him the infamous blue screen. A few minutes of tinkering and he was able to get his computer turned back on. The computer loaded up, but every single application had been deleted from his desktop. A pop-up window said that 1,000 photos were being copied over to his main drive. The background screen of his computer was also changed to the same photo of Janice, the black and white one from before. There was a pretty big change though. Janice appeared to be frowning now, and she looked fearful. The 1,000 photos had finished downloading, and now all that was left was for him to examine them. Starting with the first image, Mark noticed immediately that they were pictures of Janice. He started flipping through them rapidly and saw that the images were changing slightly. At first she wore a smile and then it turned to the frown from before. Eventually she was full on screaming. The pictures eventually became a black screen. He clicked through them until a room appeared in the photos. At the center of the room was a bed with a bundle of something on it. Mark couldn't really be sure because it was covered by a blanket. As Mark continued clicking through the pictures, a man entered the room. He walked over to the bed and ripped the blanket from it. On the bed was a girl who had been tied down and her stomach was ripped open. The man then proceeded to operate on her while she was still alive. Mark saw picture 999 and it was a close-up of the girl. It was Janice, and the final image showed her lifeless face staring into the camera. The final picture was a question mark with the phrase, "Who is Janice?" written on it. That's the story of Janice.jpg. I'm actually a big fan of stories that utilize the medium that I think has a ton of opportunity, the internet. Stories about strange websites, mysterious links and files, and obscure forums always intrigue me. This story focuses on a website that hides some very deadly secrets. I'm not sure what the purpose of the website is, and I like that. I prefer not to know why, because it adds a sense of mystery to the story. Something I left out was the ending where the entire story was part of a police report. Mark had gone missing after the incident. It doesn't really follow up with anything after that. It just says that the police dropped the case since they had no leads. The detectives later found a code that was hidden in the Janice picture. Combining it together created a video file. The officers who investigated this lead deleted the video and refused to talk about it. I don't really like this part. Officers probably aren't just going to delete evidence, no matter what they see. Also, the police aren't just going to drop this case. There's a murder involved and one of the employees has gone missing after researching the case. The overall story is fine, but this little end piece could use a revision or two. Anomaly is a creepypasta I've been wanting to talk about for a while. It's one that I find very interesting and definitely one that should be talked about more. It was created by Rembetis and was posted on 4chan before ending up on the Creepypasta wiki. The creepypasta starts with the narrator telling us that they're posting something they shouldn't be, and they've chosen 4chan so they can remain anonymous. He goes on to explain that he works for a printing company that mainly prints coffee table books. You know, the kind of books that you can flip through when you're bored, but never read fully. His company finally got an interesting deal worked out. An old man had contacted the company and wanted them to release a series of photos for him, ones that he considered to be very valuable. The name of the book was to be called Anomaly, and that's how he described his collection of photos. The company wasn't sure until they saw a few of the images being pitched, along with a small write-up for each one. They saw the interest and decided to go through with the deal. This would prove to be a tedious process as the old man would only send one photo at a time and wouldn't send the next until he received his previous one back. He was very protective of his collection, as he reminded them on several occasions. The narrator notes that they were about a third of the way through the book when the old man pulled out of the project. He hired a lawyer that voided his contract and threatened to sue them if they tried to publish it anyways. That's where the narrator's post comes in. He was so mad at all of the lost work they did that he decided he would post 14 of the photos onto the internet and let the world see them. These are those 14 photos. The first photo shows a group of school kids. This was the last image taken of these students before they perished in a fire that took place in 1908 in Collinwood, Ohio. Not a single kid survived the fire that took the lives of 172 students, 2 teachers, and 1 rescuer. The second photo is of an entity that appears to be a woman with a very large dog. This photo was taken by a man named Charlie Noonan. He was a folklorist and was visiting Oklahoma when he was told this strange tale of this woman. After going out searching for her, he was never seen again. The photos were recovered when a man at a pawn shop got a hold of his camera and sent it to Noonan's wife. These were the last images taken on the camera. The third photo shows members of the Union Army right before the Battle of Antietam. The man on the far right lost the right side of his face as well as his arm. The image has some damage that coincides with what happened. It's not entirely known when the photo was damaged. The fourth image supposedly captures the only proof of the Axeman of New Orleans. It was taken by a French photographer and inventor who was traveling around the US at the time. The image was discovered by his daughter after he had passed away. The fifth image was taken in the Grand Caverns in southwestern Virginia. It appears to show some strange cave-dwelling cryptids. This image was taken by Orrin Jeffries as he was trying to see if there was any way to take photos in total darkness. After leaving his camera in the cave, he swore he saw something and ran away until he was out of the cave. A few days later, he and a friend returned for the camera and found this image on it. In 1938, the sixth photo was taken after a car crash. A mother and her twins were in the crash, but only the mother survived. This photo was taken by a policeman at the scene, and it appears that the twins wanted to watch what happened next. The seventh photo shows a group of kids and their donkey. This was the last image of these kids taken before the accident. The 3 kids had fallen asleep in their family barn right before their father drove in with the hay sweep and dismembered the kids exactly where the damage on the photograph was. Photo 8 shows a ghost showing up to watch her murderer be hanged. He was a drifter who came into town and murdered her. He was later hanged by the townsfolk. Photo 9 was of a woman who got lost in an intricate underground tunnel system of an asylum. This asylum was famously known to be the one that inspired H.P. Lovecraft's Arkham Sanatorium and also for inspiring Batman's Arkham Asylum. One of the patients, a woman named Sarah Eustace, wandered into the underground tunnels and was never seen again. A nurse at the asylum would go down into the tunnels when she was off shift and try to find the missing woman, but was never successful. This picture was taken on one of her expeditions. The 10th photo shows a family photo where a deceased relative decided to join. He was the uncle that was known for playing jokes on everyone. This was his last joke. In 1935, a woman by the name of Josephine Yerno went missing while on one of her nightly strolls. Search parties turned up nothing, but 3 years later she would be found squatting in front of one of the neighbors' homes. She appeared to be completely alright and had no idea that she'd been missing. To her, no time had passed. She refused medical attention and even continued her walks. This photo was taken of her on one of her walks. 5 years after her initial disappearance, she would disappear again, but this time for good. No one knows what happened to her, and this photo paints a very eerie feeling to the whole situation. The 12th photo depicts a mill. This mill was infamous for its child labor and actually caused child labor laws to be enacted. A 9-year-old girl would lose her life at the mill. This photo was taken, and a tall white figure can be seen in the corner window, but is not reflected in the lake below. Photo 13 shows a girl named Lily Palmer as she's about to go trick-or-treating with her nanny. This was the same year that she tried to claw out her eyes and she reported seeing things crawling in her eyes. The girl was later hospitalized for her condition after she tried to poke out her eyes with sewing needles. This photo supposedly depicts the first signs of her illness. The final image shows a cropped version of a nuclear bomb test from 1945. The uncropped version seems to show a UFO. This image has only been seen by a select few and is likely the only copy left. That was Anomaly, and I really like the creepypasta. It gives a believable intro and then follows up with images that add to the story. These images could easily be from anywhere, just taken from the internet with their issues, but having the stories included with each one makes it interesting. I like creepypastas that include media like this. I also really enjoy each image having its own unique and creepy backstory. It makes it feel like each image is its own story, which is kind of the point, I guess. This creepypasta is definitely one worth checking out if you haven't already. The last creepypasta on this tier is Satellite Images. It was written by user Squid Ink and posted to the creepypasta wiki in 2013. It follows a person who can't leave their apartment due to a car accident that left them in a wheelchair. Due to this, they spend most of their time traveling the world using Google Earth. This was usually done by picking a random city and then dropping in on a random street. Watching the people go about their lives always made the narrator feel better. While moving around the streets of Tokyo, they saw a woman with red shoes. Her shoes stuck out because they had the same ones. For a moment, they felt like they had connected with a random Google Earth stranger. That moment lapsed as they decided it was time for bed. The next morning, they decided they would visit Paris. Grabbing the Google character icon, they dropped them onto the street view. The city of Paris was one of their favorites to see. That was until they saw the same woman again with the red shoes. This had to be some cosmically insane coincidence. Leaving Paris, they decided to go to Berlin, and once again she was there. She appeared to be getting closer to the camera each time she was seen. Her face was also turning more and more towards the narrator. Another city and she was there again. No matter which city the narrator went to, the lady with red shoes was around. She also continued to get closer with each sighting. The narrator switched to their city and once again the girl was there. This time she was looking directly at them. They thought it had to be a joke Google was playing. They switched to the camera outside of their apartment complex and saw no one. With a relieved sigh, the narrator logged off of Google Maps. They were ready to never use it again when a knock was heard at their door. The narrator had a camera installed to see who their visitors might be. When they flipped at the camera, they saw the woman with red shoes staring directly at them. Her face was still blurred as if on Google Maps. This is kind of a classic story in the world of creepypastas. I've heard this one a multitude of times by many different narrators. I actually enjoyed the story a lot. The story is excellent at setting up its premise of a person who can't travel the world and finds another way. This of course leads to the lady in red shoes tracking them down. The ending is purposefully vague, and I think it does well for the story. I also really like the use of Google Maps as a story element. People using websites that we all know about is an easy way to connect with your audience. The description of the blurry-faced woman staring into the camera at the end was the perfect way to end the story as well. It's foreboding and creepy, so perfect for an internet horror story. The image that's often used for this creepypasta is one from Google Maps. There are a ton of images on Google Maps that are bizarre, creepy, disturbing, and unexplainable. I'll be talking about those images later in the iceberg, so don't worry. We'll discuss this one too. This man is the first entry to start off the second tier of this iceberg. Have you ever seen this man before? Maybe in your dreams? He is said to have been seen around the world, but mainly by residents of major cities. He will appear to them in their dreams and talk to them or give them advice. Every single person who has laid eyes upon this man in their dreams claims to have never seen him in real life. The story goes that at least 2,000 people who were being seen by therapists all reported sightings. Each person's dream involving this man varied in some pretty drastic ways. In some dreams, the man was benevolent and helpful, while in others, he was violent and cruel. A man with this face and depiction has not been identified. This is because this man doesn't exist. Not in a supernatural kind of way, but more as this was all created as a publicity stunt. This man was created by a marketing company to promote something. That something hasn't really been released yet, though it is believed to be in relation to a movie. No movie has been announced or released since. This man also had a website created to go with the viral hoax called thisman.org. The website hosted thousands of fake accounts with this man and even had images sent in from the public trying to identify the man. The website also had theories that tried to legitimize the whole thing. This is honestly such an interesting marketing plan, but it didn't really sell anything. I guess the face of this man is now stuck in the subconscious of the internet. I even read 2 separate creepypastas that claimed that this man was haunting them. Pass It On is a creepypasta from No Sleep. It was written by fellow YouTuber and horror content creator Penny Tails Up. It follows a young child who is rather imaginative and decided to create a game to play while in class to escape boredom. Before that, they would daydream to no end. The game they created was pretty simple to play. It had no name, as naming it would take the fun out of it. All of the kids would just refer to it as taking notes. The narrator would write something on a piece of paper. It could be anything from a joke to the start of a story, or even just random words. The note would then be passed to another person and then to another. The first rule of the game was not to be caught, by the teacher that is. The second rule is that whoever gets the note next has to add something to it. The third and final rule is to pass it on after you add to it. The game ended when the narrator got the paper back. The kids would all then gather around the narrator at recess and read what had been added. This was usually filled with laughter and fun all around. This made the narrator the most popular kid in class, and that in turn made them not need their imagination as much. No, they had real friends to interact with, and didn't need the imaginary ones anymore. It all started like any other version of the game. The narrator wrote something down and passed it along. The paper moved from person to person until getting to a girl named Lydia. She screamed and dropped the paper. The teacher turned around and she said that she saw a big spider. The game continued until the note came back to the narrator. The class seemed quieter than usual, as they exited for lunch. Lydia ran up to the narrator and stopped them in the hall. She asked that they not show anyone the note at lunch today. This confused the narrator until they decided to look at the note. The page started out how most do with the simple writings of kids, but then about halfway down the page was a drawing. This drawing was incredibly gruesome and showed Lydia ripping herself open. The drawing looked far better than anyone in the class was capable of, but someone had to have drawn it. The narrator agreed not to show it and told everyone that they'd lost the note. The next day in class, something was off. The narrator scanned the room and saw that Lydia's chair was empty. There was an odd silence about the classroom, well, for at least half of it. The half that had seen the drawing, that is. Kids kept asking for the narrator to start the next note. It took a bit of prodding, but they finally decided to do it. The note went around the room until it got back, and this time a new picture was drawn. This one was of another classmate, Brian. Brian didn't show up the next day either. The narrator wanted to end the game. They wrote that they didn't want to play anymore, but when they looked down at the page, it clearly said, "Pass it on," in perfect cursive. The handwriting couldn't have been theirs. It was too neat, too perfect. The note was then passed along, but it never made it back to the narrator. Instead, it was actually seen by the teacher, Mrs. Knott, who took the paper and placed it in her desk drawer. That was it. The game was over. The class had lost, but no one seemed to mind. At the end of it all, 7 kids never returned to school. The kids were never told what happened to their classmates. They were kids after all. They were spared the details, but deep down the narrator knew what had happened to them. The idea had slipped their mind for decades. That was until, while drinking alone at a bar, an old woman walked in and sat down next to them. The woman looked mildly familiar, but they couldn't place her face. It wasn't until the woman spoke that they knew. "Pass it on," she said with a shrill voice. It was Mrs. Knott, and as they realized it, a note was passed to the narrator. It was old, but clearly the one from that day. She had held onto it for all these years. The woman looked ragged beyond her years. A tear rolled down the teacher's face as the narrator left with the paper. That night as they opened the note, they saw something out of the corner of their eye. A low voice asks, "Did you miss me?" Pass It On is a great read, but I'm not really sold on the ending. I like a little ambiguity in my horror stories, and this one tells you a lot. We can surmise that the entity that started to haunt their game used to be an imaginary friend of the narrator's. This murderous entity then started targeting the kids, the new friends of the narrator. Overall, a good story and definitely one with an interesting concept. Teddy isn't really an image creepypasta. The only reason I'm including Teddy here is because this image gave me nightmares for weeks. This is the image attached to the creepypasta. I don't know the origins of this image or what it depicts, but that's not really important. This image is freaky to me, and I've always been pretty freaked out by creepy dolls and toys. The creepypasta starts with the narrator explaining how their sister had a creepy stuffed teddy bear when they were little. The teddy bear had this weird and realistic face that used to terrify them. The toy scared them so much that they refused to be in the same room with it for a while. Since the family had a dog, the stuffed bear had to be placed up so that it wouldn't get chewed on. The best place to put the bear was on a shelf in the hallway. Every night when the narrator would go up to their bedroom for bedtime, they would see the teddy bear's face around the corner of the hallway. It always seemed to be staring at them. Years later, the sister had outgrown the thing and it was placed in the toy cabinet. The toy cabinet just so happened to be in the narrator's room. Every night they would wake up and see the bear just staring in their direction. That was until one night when the narrator woke up and saw the bear on the floor at the end of the room. Thinking it just fell, they went back to sleep. They awoke again, and it seemed like the bear was closer. After fighting a yawn, they opened their eyes to see that the bear was at the foot of their bed. The narrator pulled the covers over their head and looked out again. The bear was gone. It was all some sleep-deprived hallucination, they thought, and laid back down to try and sleep. They opened their eyes one last time and saw the bear above them on the bed. The bear lunged and the narrator jumped out of bed screaming. The narrator grabbed the bear and threw it in the fireplace. They watched it burn and felt easy in doing so. Now the narrator was 19 and finally moving into their own place. As they were finishing unpacking everything, they noticed a rather large box, left on the front porch. Bringing it in, they saw that it was a cupboard, one that they didn't remember packing. The narrator left it in the living room, and when they came back, there it was. The bear was sitting on the cupboard, staring at them. The story itself is fine, but that image is just not okay. This story is your standard haunted or possessed item story. I like it, but definitely could have used a few more scares. I guess the image was pretty scary all by itself. This picture is what cursed images are really made of. New Cell Phone is a short creepypasta, so I'll be reading it in full again. A couple months ago, my friend's cousin, a single mother, bought a new cell phone. After a long day of work, she came home, placed her phone on the counter, and went to watch TV. Her son came to her and asked if he could play with her new phone. She told him not to call anyone or mess with text messages, and he agreed. At around 11:20, she was drowsy, so she decided to tuck her son in and go to bed. She walked to his room and saw that he wasn't there. She ran over to the other room to find him sleeping on her bed with the phone in his hand. Relieved, she picked her phone back up from his hand to inspect it. Browsing through it, she noticed only minor changes such as a new background, banner, etc. But then she opened up her saved pictures. She began deleting the pictures he had taken until only one new picture remained. When she first saw it, she was in disbelief. It was her son sleeping on her bed, but the picture was taken by someone else above him, and it showed the left half of an elderly woman's face. This image in question is on screen now. Honestly, a very chilling story that seems like it could happen in real life. Crime Scene Photos is an interesting creepypasta that I hadn't heard of until starting research for this video. It's pretty short, but does what it set out to do with its short length. A man named Matt is waiting at a hotel for his friend Mike to show up. Finally, after waiting for what feels like forever, he decides to call him. What he gets instead is the police on the other end. The police tell Matt that his friend has been murdered and they would like him to come to the crime scene for questioning. They give him the address and he walked in that direction. Matt arrives and sees his friend in a bloody mess surrounded by a few cops. His friend was clearly visible on the ground. The cops asked him if he knew anything, but he could pick up that they were also accusing him in the nicest terms. After a back and forth talk, the cops asked if he could reach out to the victim's family. Matt did so, calling Jack, the victim's brother. The two talked for a minute and Jack didn't believe him, so he took these pictures and sent them to him. He finally believed him and told him he knew who the murderer was based on the leather jacket he wore and that he would be there in 5 minutes. Matt didn't know the correlation between the jacket and who the murderer was. Then a thought suddenly came to him as Jack strolled up to the cops. He never told him where the murder took place. I don't have much to say about this one. It's pretty good. On to the next one. Red Moon was written by Avenging Angel and is our next creepypasta. This is the first and only, as far as I've seen, image creepypasta that is a sci-fi horror. You'll see what I mean, but let's get to the story. On July 18th of 2020, NASA launched a spacecraft named the Goliath. The Goliath had 6 crew members and was on a mission to establish the first colony on the moon. Radio communications with the crew were only possible on the side of the moon facing Earth, so the astronauts were told to keep on that side to have constant communication. The side of the moon they were going to colonize had few craters and seemed like a good match for their needs. Electronic journals were to be kept throughout the mission. The only danger came from the meteors, as the moon had no atmosphere to stop them. The journals came to NASA daily, and they were pretty mundane for the most part. Messages about where schools and hospitals could be placed, ideas for infrastructure with the moon's gravity, and how to properly establish society. Nothing interesting, that is, until no messages were received on the 17th of September. Of course, this could just be the astronauts forgetting to send one. The next day was the same thing, with no word from the crew. After a bit of time, the videos were finally recovered, and this is what was on them. The first video is from the 16th of September, and shows the astronauts exploring a crater near where they were planning to colonize. The video is 10 minutes in length and pretty normal. Near the end of the video, you can hear the crew talking about hearing scratching noises coming from the crater. These sounds were not audible in the video. The next video came from the 17th of September. It had the astronauts investigating a large crater near their site. This one was massive compared to the one from the other video. Everything seemed normal until the scratching sound begins. This time it is very audible in the video. The crew is visibly annoyed by it, so much so that one member walks towards the source and leans over the edge of the crater. An unknown source grabs the astronaut and pulls him into the crater, with the video stopping abruptly after. The final video has a different title. It is titled Code 7700 Please Help. In it, you can see one of the astronauts in an oxygen tent talking directly into the camera. His voice is low but urgent. He explains that he can't contact the radio for some reason, and that 2 of his crew have been slaughtered. The scratching noise starts again and the camera is knocked to the side. Pleas for help are heard as the scratching sounds begin to get louder. Blood and guts splatter on the side of the tent. The video ends abruptly. A 4-man team was sent to fix the communication tower. When the 4 returned, none of them wanted to talk about what they saw. They recovered a few things from the mission, including this photograph. This is such an excellent use of the image creepypasta format. The story itself is really creepy, especially if you have a fear of aliens. It also has this creepy final image to cap off the story. It reminds me of the movie Alien in a few ways, which is great. I will say that there's also some looming dread with this photo. It's so hard to discern exactly what you're looking at. That really adds to the nightmare fuel here. The painting is our next creepypasta. This creepypasta is written by Meek and can be found on creepypasta.com. There are actually 2 stories with this name, or at least that I could find. The name is pretty simple, so it's likely there are countless stories that bear the same name. The narrator starts the story by telling us about his brother that had gone missing, or more accurately, how his brother had been kidnapped. The kidnapper was described as being methodical and professional, as no fingerprints or signs of break-in were found that night. The narrator, though, knows the truth. It all started when his dad found a painting in the attic of their home. The painting was of a tall gray house surrounded by grass. Behind the house was a sudden drop down to the ocean. It was built on a cliff's edge. There were words written on the back of the painting that the narrator's mom recognized as Welsh, but didn't translate. The narrator didn't like the painting, but his dad loved it. The painting was then placed in the boys' room. The narrator wakes up one night at 2 a.m., feeling hot and sweaty. He sees that his brother Jamie is still asleep. He tiptoes out of the bedroom and gets some water from the sink. Feeling refreshed, he returns to bed. That's when he notices a strange black shape on the painting. The black shape resembles a man, but he didn't remember seeing him before. The next day it was gone. No one had believed him, and he didn't really believe himself. That night, though, he saw the man again. This time he was double the size and in a different position. The narrator covered his head with his blanket and went to sleep shaking. The next night the author woke again at 2 a.m. and saw that the painting was completely black. He tried to not make a move and be as still as possible. Fear overcame him though, and he got out of bed and crept towards the bedroom door. He opened it and then ran towards the bathroom. The narrator locked the door and hid in the tub. For a few moments, there was no sound, until the creaks of the floorboards could be heard. He stayed quiet for a moment as he heard someone walk up to the bathroom door. He called out asking if it was his brother, his mom, or his dad. Only sound that he heard in return was the scratching on the wood. This lasted for a few moments before he could hear whatever it was walking away. He awoke the next morning to the sound of banging on the door. It was his dad, and he was calling for the two boys. When only one emerged, they called the police. On the door of the bathroom were deep gash marks. To this day, his brother has never been found, and the narrator is sure he was taken by the entity from the painting. The painting itself looked different now. There was a small child that was sitting inside the house, and he appeared to be crying. The boy looked suspiciously like his brother, but no one would believe him. The narrator, now an adult, still has the painting. He keeps it in the attic, and every once in a while he'll hear footsteps from up there. He calls out his brother's name every time. Not once has there been a response. The image attached to this creepypasta is The Crying Boy by Bruno Amadio. This image is correlated with this creepypasta, but the picture itself has its own story to tell, likely one that I'll get to at a later part of this iceberg. The painting is a great short story to tell around a campfire. It has that easy retellability that a lot of these earlier creepypastas had. The story was circulating the internet in 2014. It's a very fun story and definitely one I bring out around Halloween for my non-creepypasta friends. SCP-3199 is our first SCP on one of these icebergs. It's a topic I've been wanting to cover for a long time. SCPs are more likely to be connected to a different iceberg that I have in the works, but there are some that are image-based or have famous images attached to them. SCP-3199 is one of those SCPs. It has an image that I'm sure you've seen before. This image is of the SCP in question. I'm going to read the description of SCP-3199. SCP-3199 denotes a species of sapient Category 5 biological entities of currently indeterminable origin. Though tissue samples indicate the presence of silky chicken, chimpanzee, stoat, mussel, adder, and human DNA. They are typically hairless, stained with a thin layer of albumin-like excretion, and stand at an average of 2.9 meters. Its weight averages 780 kilograms for a matured instance and 360 kilograms for a hatchling. Autopsy has determined that the cervical vertebrae of a mature SCP-3199 instance are composed of cartilage rather than bone. This enables the neck and throat to twist and dislocate to around 340 degrees in either direction, aiding their unusual reproductive cycle. SCP-3199 are opportunistic hunters engaging with live subjects within a currently unidentified radius within a radius of 0.6 kilometers surrounding hatchlings that have not yet reached full adolescence. Average speed is recorded at 25 kilometers an hour. Upon contact with humans or other animal subjects, SCP-3199 will proceed to redacted, liquefying internal organs and bone structure. A suitable cadaver is then transferred within range of the closest hatchling. Regardless of what SCP-3199 appears to be, this image is pretty haunting on its own. A very clear sense of dread can be derived from it. It's something I wouldn't want to see at any point in time during the day, but especially not at night. Image 001 is actually more of a video creepypasta than an image creepypasta, but it does have both. Either way, it is an interesting read, and like I mentioned before, some of these creepypastas will have overlap in other genres. A college student was about to start their first year at school and needed supplies. What they ended up doing was trying to find some local who was selling a laptop, as it was the last item they needed. They almost gave up before seeing an ad for one in the newspaper. The college student drove up to a house on the edge of the woods and bought the nice Dell laptop. The man selling it was thin and wore a worn flannel jacket, but that wasn't the interesting part about him. He seemed relieved that he was able to sell his laptop, which the narrator thought was strange. A short drive later, and the narrator was back in their apartment with the laptop. They booted it up and found that the laptop actually hadn't been wiped clean like advertised. Before they can reset the laptop, they see a series of video and image files with very basic names. They click on the first video file titled 001. It starts up and shows shaky cam footage from inside of a car. A woman leaves a bar and the car slowly starts to follow behind her. This leads directly into the next video, which was titled 002. This video continues with the car following behind the woman from the first video. The next video shows the car in the parking lot of the woman's house, as we see her walk in first. There's a pause in the video before the lights in the house go off. Another person then opens the door and is seen walking towards the house. They are wearing a black hoodie and they make their way inside the house quietly. This continues until video 4, which shows the person placing something in the bed of their truck and driving off. For a split second you can see them driving up to a house, but the interesting part is the truck that's parked outside of this house looks the same as the one the seller had. Video 5 starts inside of the house, and is almost too dark to see anything. Finally, the sounds of muffled screams could be heard as the camera panned up to show the lady from before, beaten and bloody. The camera slowly zoomed in on her face before cutting out. Video 6 showed a new woman, with rubber gloves and a respirator, pouring something into a bathtub. She pulled a black garbage bag in behind her and slowly started to deposit the items into the tub. It was clearly the woman from before. The laptop was turned over to the police and the narrator was able to find out a little about what they saw. The woman that was killed was the young girlfriend of a married man. The man's wife was the one dumping the girl's body. This doesn't explain how the man that the narrator bought the laptop from got it, or why they had the same truck. Questions they hoped the police could solve. Image 001 is an interesting creepypasta for one specific reason. It feels like it could actually happen. The biggest factor is the lack of anything supernatural, but also the recording itself. Of course, I'm not sure who would record their entire crime like this. Maybe she was going to show it to her husband as some sort of act of intimidation or something. The creepypasta is fine, but that believability makes it a little more scary. I also like the ending being a little vague. Danny Boy is our next creepypasta. It was posted on the Creepypasta Wiki in 2015, but I can't find an author. The person who posted it goes by the name of Jake Wick. The story isn't terribly long, but it's interesting in how it is presented. It's presented like a real missing persons case. Let's read it. For those of you who don't know, the era of the 1980s wasn't the best time for a kid to grow up in America. Back then, there was a so-called satanic panic going on. Kids were going missing left and right, and everyone was convinced that the cults were to blame. This blame it on Satanist attitude was especially apparent where I grew up, in South Carolina. Around there, blaming non-Christians for problems was as much a part of the culture as guns, sweet tea, and going to church on Sundays. I grew up in a small town in the Sunshine State, but the state soon proved to grow cloudier and cloudier around me as time went on. Things began to go downhill for me when I was 12 years old. I grew up in a little one-story house with my parents and my 8-year-old brother Danny. It's safe to say that Danny could be pretty annoying sometimes. In fact, looking back, I'd say that he was on my nerves more than he was off. Still, I loved the kid, deep down. Once in a while, he and I got along, and the moments that we did see eye to eye, well, they were truly memorable. Our times together ceased on April 13th of 1984. That day seems like a dream to me, now a distant memory. Danny and I had just gotten home from school. Our father was still at work, and my mother was gone too. Leaving a note on the fridge for us, went to Jen's, please run to the supermarket and pick up eggs so I can make you cake. The following day was my birthday. I had almost forgotten. Well, I told Danny to stay put while I ran to the store, but the little bugger informed me that he was coming along. Of course, I argued with him. I did not need him coming with me to the store. He'd been annoying me the entire walk home from school. As I argued with him, I knew in the back of my mind that I had to take him. I mean, come on, the kid was 8 years old. I couldn't leave him home alone. My parents would kill me for that. I finally gave in, told him to shut his mouth and keep it shut, and set out the door with him. Of course, the little annoyance bugged me the entire way. By the time we got to the supermarket, I was about ready to clobber him. All I did, however, was pull him to the side and scold him for about a minute. Looking back on it now, I wish I hadn't. I wish I just embraced his annoyingness. Well, I turned away from the brat and made a beeline through the store, towards the poultry aisle. Always having trouble finding things in the supermarket, I was overjoyed that I was able to find the eggs. I found the aisle, opened the cold fridge door, and grabbed the eggs. All that was left to do was check out and find Danny. I couldn't believe it. I had even kept track of my little brother after I had scolded him. I frantically searched the store, and after not being able to find him for several minutes, I began to ask customers if they had seen a short, blonde-headed boy. No one had a clue. I even resorted to getting customer service to call for him. But my little brother didn't come. The worst part was going home and telling my parents. I felt terrible. The next day was the worst birthday ever, as you can imagine. I still hate my birthday for this reason. For weeks, the police searched for him. My parents frantically combed the entire town, always stopping to post missing person signs all over the place. I couldn't even think of what could have happened. I was scolded by my parents every night for it, but I quickly slipped into depression, taking to alcohol as a means of escape. After a month, the search was called off. No one had any idea where Danny was. He had disappeared without any trace. A couple weeks after the search was called off, the police called in my parents, showing them a photograph they had found in the parking lot of an abandoned store. The case remains open to this day. This story is told in a way that makes me think of a missing persons documentary. It goes beat for beat up to the moment the kid was taken. It even has a moment where they find a piece of evidence that keeps the story going. I'm not a fan of them just finding a creepy photograph, but I get it. This image isn't all that scary, but it does relate to the story, so it's not that bad, I suppose. The Awful Thing We Did to Eliza is a creepypasta that feels like an old folktale. It covers something very realistic and very likely to happen back then. It's a true fear that I have, but something that likely won't happen. The story opens with a young girl talking about a family picture they were finally going to take. The year isn't mentioned, but you can tell it's an early period of time by how expensive the photo is and how hard it is to take one. The little girl talks about how they were all preparing for the photo. She and her brother were sitting on the floor coloring, while Eliza was upstairs in her Sunday best, as she called it. Their parents were sitting at the table with the mom crying. Eliza had gotten sick, and the doctor that came by the day before had pronounced her dead. Still, they wanted to take a family photo. This was the only time they'd be able to do so with the whole family. The idea was very weird to the little girl, but she figured that the grown-ups knew best. She got to see her sister one last time before the photograph. She looked like she was sleeping, except for the gentle rise and fall of her chest was missing. The family went downstairs and set up the photo. The photographer offered to paint eyes on Eliza so that she would appear to be alive. The idea was so weird to the little girl, but she couldn't really say or do anything about it. The eyes he colored on her were brown, but her eyes were actually blue. This wasn't the weirdest part, though. Something just felt off about the whole thing. The photographer told everyone to stay as still as possible so the photo doesn't come out blurry. It took 40 to 50 seconds for the exposure. The family stayed still, and the thought that Eliza would be the only one to come out crystal clear crept into her mind. The day after, the family had a funeral for Eliza. She was buried in a cemetery near the church they attended. A few weeks later, while the little girl was walking through her house, she got a strange feeling. It was as she walked by the new family photo. The photo was framed in the hallway. She hadn't really had the chance to look at it yet. The feelings of that day kept her from doing so. When she finally did look closely at the photo, her heart sank, and she wasn't sure why. It reminded her how the family seemed to be grieving even more after the funeral, and how tired the doctor had looked the last time she saw him. Eliza's face in the photo was blurry. There are a few things in this life that scare me as much as the thought of being buried alive. This is a story that not only captures a bit of that fear, but also makes it worse by subjecting it to a child. The darkest part of the story isn't what happened, though, or that they all knew. It was that it was a sadly common occurrence during this time period. People were misdiagnosed all the time. The number of people buried before their time was very high. That's the part that scares me. This could be a real story. This could be how someone met their end. The girl in the drawing goes by a less advertiser-friendly name. This is a pretty short internet urban legend that comes from Japan. It started making the rounds online around 2009, and has since been passed through multiple internet mystery and creepypasta websites. The earliest date of this picture on the internet was in 2006 when it was posted in a video on YouTube. The story attached to the picture claims that it was drawn by a girl from Japan that took her own life after drawing and posting it online. If a person stares at the image for 5 minutes straight, they will suddenly get the urge to follow in her footsteps. This story has been spread around a lot, but the real thing to look out for while staring at this photo is if it changes. It's said that if it changes while you're staring at it, then something bad is coming for you. Attachment 1 image is a creepypasta written by Top Ramen and is very short. Let me summarize it for you. You hear a sound. It's your phone. You grab your phone and see you got a message. It's from an anonymous number, so you ignore it. No one has your number except for your mom since it's a new phone. You go back to what you were doing and hear it again. You check your phone and see another message. You need to reply and tell them they have the wrong number. You hear a thud on your window and go to check, but no one is there. You hear another sound from your phone and grab it to see that you have another message, but this time it says you have an attachment, an image. You open it to see 3 pictures of you taken from inside of your closet. I found a digital camera in the woods is our last creepypasta on this tier, and it's a bit of an interesting one. This story is not long, actually only 2 paragraphs, but it has a lot of show rather than tell. The story starts with someone saying that they found a silver box in the woods. It turned out to be a digital camera, and it already had some photos on it. The rest of the creepypasta is just showing off those photos. So how about we look through those photos together and see what we might find. This is the first image, and I can't actually see anything too creepy in the photo. Some people have claimed that the tree on the right has a bloody handprint on it, but it looks pretty normal to me. The second image is of this sign telling people to stop. It doesn't have anything too creepy around it either, but it does show the story progression as the owner of the camera went somewhere they might not have been allowed. Image 3 is super atmospheric and really sets the tone of the story way better than the actual story could. Having such a strong visual for the setting is very important. This gives me Slenderman vibes, but in a good way. I'm going to kind of start moving through these because a lot of them don't have much to say about them. The next image is pretty obviously interesting. Here you can see a man or a man-like creature standing behind a tree. The next image of note is image 8. This one looks pretty atmospheric, but people have claimed that this shape is a tiny creature that is watching from above. I can't tell if it's supposed to be something or not, but it definitely looks like something to examine further. Image 9 has these eyes looking down at you here. There's also a similar shape to the prior image. These could be more creatures, but I'm not entirely sure. Image 10 has this shape over here that looks like it could be something walking, but it's really hard to make out. Image 11 shows this old structure in the woods. Of course, we still don't have any idea where this is. If you look here, you can maybe make out a person standing in the window. Image 15 shows an anarchy symbol spray painted on the walls of this building. There are 2 actually, though they also kind of look like pentagrams. It could be either, but I'm leaning more towards pentagrams. Image 16 shows a man standing in the window. The shape is hard to make out, but I feel mildly confident in this assessment. I have no idea why this man would be standing there. Image 17 finally shows the creature or whatever it is. It shambles around like it's lopsided. Image 18 has more eyes following the photographer. The next image is of a tower in the fog, with the following image taken up close. The images show the photographer ascending the tower until they reach a point where they can pull away a plank. On the other side is a humanoid creature. It kind of resembles the rake to me. Sort of. It's hard to tell exactly what I'm looking at. It could just be a person. The next few photos are the photographer trying to escape. The final image is taken from the ground, likely where the person found the camera. This is an excellent and very unique story. It comes off as very realistic because of the photo evidence. I would say that the story isn't super cohesive because it's not meant to be. We're supposed to figure out what's going on based on the images. The images themselves are great. They tell the story in a linear fashion. I can easily tell that there's something chasing the photographer. The blurry movement images are great for that as well. I don't think many other creepypastas could pull this off, but it works really well here. I would love to talk more about this story, but that can be saved for a later video. I looked through some old family pictures and something doesn't add up. It's a story from No Sleep about a man named Steven noticing something off while going through his family photo album. The story was posted in 2019 by Rain Writer. The story starts with Steven remembering the death of his parents 2 years prior. He missed them dearly, and this led him to look through his family photo album again. There was always one photo that got him, a picture taken when he was really young in front of some restaurant. This leads to Steven deciding to take a trip to find the town and restaurant where the photo was taken. After doing a little research, he determines that the restaurant must be gone because the town he'd visited didn't have one. Instead of giving up, Steven decided to post his family photo on a German subreddit. Most of the replies weren't helpful in the slightest. He gave it a day, but still nothing. Then he saw that he had a message from someone else on Reddit, a name he didn't recognize. A man named Michael had sent him a strange message. The message said that he had a picture that looked identical to the one he posted. Steven responded unsure of what he meant. The next message contained a link. When he clicked on it, he saw an exact replica of his family photo, but with different people in it. Every detail in the image was identical. The conversation between the two continued, with them realizing that a lot of their family photos were the exact same, save for the people in them. This was starting to creep out Steven, who now had more questions than answers. The two then decide they should meet up. Steven packs his photo album and goes to Michael's house. They exchange greetings and then begin sifting through the images. Steven notices Michael's tower of computer monitors on his large desk. The man explains that he does most of his work online. As they go through the photos, they realize that the pictures were taken at different times. Steven's photos were taken and dated for 2005, while Michael's always dated 13 years prior. Every single photo had a similar amount of time between them. The topic of their parents came up next. Both of their parents had died 2 years prior, but in different ways. The exact date of their deaths, neither of them could remember though. It was starting to puzzle them even more. It was starting to get late, so Steven decided to make a trip back to his home. He left some of the photos with Michael to examine. Michael also claimed to have a friend that could find out if the photos were doctored in any way. With that news, he left. A day later, Steven received the text he was waiting for. He was told to check his email by Michael. He did just that and found out the images were in fact doctored. The background of each image was actually taken in the Soviet Union. It wasn't just that original photo either. All of the photos were taken from Soviet propaganda images. Steven called Michael and the two discussed what they thought was going on. They didn't know why anyone would create these fake images or how they still had memories of these places. Nothing was making sense. Michael said he would get back in touch with his contact and let Steven know if he heard anything. With that phone call ended, all there was to do was wait. Waiting was the hardest part though. That waiting wouldn't really be rewarded. Steven got a phone call a few days later from Michael. He claimed to have finally got answers but urged Steven not to look into it. Before Steven could ask why, he hung up. Steven tried everything he could to get into contact with Michael again, but he wasn't able to. His calls would go to voicemail and messages would remain unchecked. A few days passed and there it was in a tabloid. A man had jumped from a bridge. That man was Michael. As soon as work ended, Stephen rushed over to Michael's house and snuck in a window. He found Michael's computer monitor broken and papers all over the ground. A few of the sheets of paper were actually scientific documents. Stage 7. Memory Alteration. Test subjects are infused with artificial memories to create the illusion of a normal life. What the hell was this? I went through the stack and checked another one. Stage 3. Growth Acceleration. Gen manipulation ensures the maturity of test subjects in only a fraction of the normal human growth period. What was I reading? This made no sense. I checked the rest of them, but they were all the same. Stage 4. Mind Acceleration. Stage 8. Social Behavior Therapy. And on it went. I looked through the whole stack until I found the last one. Stage 13. Project Termination and Future Developments. Test subjects show insufficient results. The project was deemed unsuccessful and was to be terminated immediately. The euthanasia of remaining test subjects is considered unnecessary. To be kept under surveillance to gather information about adaptability to society and social norms. As Stephen was sifting through papers, he heard the door being opened. He overheard them talking about Michael and mentioned subjects talking to each other. He didn't want to stick around and took off out the window again. That's when Stephen tries to remember his parents. He had no memory of them other than the photos. He didn't know if they were even real or if anything he knew was. I looked through some old family pictures, something doesn't add up. It appears that Stephen was some sort of experiment. They implanted fake memories, though it was never stated why. The story was interesting enough to read, but the ending was rather lackluster. I found a disturbing photo in my family photo album. It's a creepypasta written by K.M. Slyfield. It was posted sometime in 2020 and follows an unnamed narrator visiting home while off from work. The story opens with our narrator explaining the one rule that their mom had was that they weren't allowed to look at the photo album. When they were younger, they would ask why, and the only explanation they were given is that it was very old. This wasn't a good enough reason for the narrator, but he soon forgot about it altogether. The narrator notes that his mom seemed less healthy lately, so he was visiting her more often. While home recently, they noticed that she wasn't just physically weaker, but emotionally. She told him that he was fine and he didn't want to pry. After a night out with some friends, the narrator returns home to their mother gone and the photo album just sitting on the coffee table. This was the chance they'd been waiting for. They opened the album slowly as not to damage it in any way. What he saw wasn't all that surprising. Old photos of his mom and grandparents from forever ago. There was one image in particular that grabbed the narrator's attention, though. The photo showed their grandpa as a teenager, and he was holding a baby. The child was off, though. She had the proportions of a baby, but the face of an old woman. The image was the oldest one on the album and was freaking him out. Later, the narrator decided to visit his grandparents that are now in an old folks' home. They start off with a pretty normal conversation before asking about the photo. The grandpa then yells at him that they aren't going to talk about that. This only fueled their curiosity more. The narrator didn't know what to do next. He spent most of his time sitting at his mom's house. Finally, he asked his mom about the house that the grandparents used to live in. The house was still owned by them and was actually passed down from the great-grandparents and down to them. There was a chance that he could find something in that house. The narrator decided that night he would go and search the house. He would leave that Sunday as the house was on the way back to where he was living currently. He bid his mother farewell and left for home. He arrived at his grandparents' home and was surprised to see it was in good condition. It also looked pretty typical for a home from its era. The house was mostly empty save for an old TV. The TV worked, but it didn't receive a signal. The narrator explored the house and didn't seem to find anything of value. As he was walking out, a noise from the wall suddenly caught his attention. The house was old. Old houses make noises. At least that's what everyone says. But it sounded almost like an animal was trapped in the walls. The more he listened, the odder the sound was. The narrator ran to the local DIY store and bought a hatchet. He cut one of the floorboards up and pulled it away. Shining his flashlight down, he couldn't see much. The sound was getting louder, though. He took the hatchet again and pulled up a second floorboard. This time he had enough room to stick his head through. He shone his flashlight into the dark abyss of the home and saw it. Here's the exact quote. There in the corner of the crawl space was the most repulsive and disgusting creature I have ever seen. It had human-like flesh that sagged like a puddle around its lump-like body, as if it was wearing a skin that was far too big for it. Its lifeless, hollow black eyes stared back at me like I was looking into eternal darkness. It seemed almost human. It had hands and feet, with nails that curled around like infectious, discolored spirals. It opened its mouth to reveal the most rotten and vile teeth I've ever seen. There were many of them, racked up inside the mouth of the being as if it had grown multiple sets of teeth on top of one another. They varied in decay as they went further into its mouth. The narrator then called the police to explain the situation. When they arrived, they told the narrator to leave the house and they would take care of it. The narrator ghosted his family for a little while, not sure what to think. A few weeks later, he went back to his mom's house and was told that she was gone. The new tenants had just moved in and had no idea who he was referring to. He tried his grandparents' old folks' home next, but also no luck. The receptionist gave him a sad look as she told him that his grandfather had been arrested for the imprisonment and torture of his sister. This story has great build-up, but the ending is rather tacked on. It felt like a lot of questions didn't get answered. I have no idea how or why she got the way she was. Why was she a fleshy monster? How did she survive when they no longer lived in the home? Why was she this crazy family secret? These are all answers I'll probably never get, but I guess that's how it goes sometimes. On to the next one. The photograph is a short creepypasta, so let's read it in full. During one summer in the 1950s, a group of friends found an old, abandoned house in the woods. They entered to see what they could find inside. Inside the house, a water hole was dug in the center of the room. 3 of the boys decided to swim while the others stayed dry and took pictures of the house with his camera. 30-some years later, in 1982, a man was hiking and found an old camera. He took it to the local police station to try and find out who it belonged to. The police got the film developed. Most of the photos have been destroyed, save for a few. This picture is the last picture that was taken. It is unknown what happened to the boys' faces or why the series of pictures abruptly ended. The kids have never been identified, and their bodies were never found. What is happening in this image still remains a mystery. This is the image attached, and I really think the picture is the most critical part of this story. The story itself sets up a mystery, but only barely. The idea, on the other hand, is creepy and hard to trace. I think the image really brings up the creepypasta. It makes it scary, and well, it really couldn't exist without it. A creepy photo for sure. Chain letters are messages that people send to others with vague mentions of good luck or harm for not spreading the message. Think like the Smile Dog creepypasta, but in real life. People used to send chain letters all the time, and I've gotten my fair share of them. A lot of chain letters had a bit of a horror-themed connotation. Instead of going through the history of chain letters, I'm just going to go through some of the most popular ones I can find online. Once you read this chain letter, you cannot get out. Finish reading this until it is done. Hi, I am Teddy. I am 7 years old. I have no eyes and blood all over my face. I am dead. This is the start to the Teddy chain letter, and from there it just explains people who died due to not sending the chain letter to anyone. 0 people leads to you dying, 1 to 6 leads to you getting injured, 7 to 11 equals a big fright, and 12 and over is for safety and good fortune. This one is pretty simple and the photo is slightly unnerving. I used to get chain texts like this all the time when I was in high school. Next up is the Clarissa chain letter, a pretty popular one. It reads, "Warning, this is not a joke, carry on reading or you will die. Once there was a little girl called Clarissa. She was 10 years old and she lived in a mental hospital because she killed her mom and dad. She got so bad she went to kill all the staff in the hospital, so the government decided that the best idea was to get rid of her. The rest of the chain letter talks about how they were going to kill Clarissa humanely, but something went wrong and she died in a ton of agony. Now she attacks people who do not forward this chain letter upon receiving it. The image attached is creepy, and I actually remember seeing this one, or one that was similar to it, years ago. These are just some examples of chain letters. Honestly, a really interesting piece of internet urban legend that I might do a whole video on someday. There's just something about a friend sending you this message at 2 AM while you're watching Adult Swim or reading through creepypastas online. The Man in the Painting is a creepypasta that was uploaded to the Creepypasta Wiki in 2013. The story revolves around a man trying to figure out why the eyes of a painting keep following him wherever he goes. Now he knows the tricks paintings use to have the eyes follow you, and he knows how to break that trick. What he's having issue with is how the painting seems to be able to ignore that trick and continue to follow him. This leads to the man trying to find the artist that created the painting. A website was discovered, and so too was the artist's name, El Pintor de Color, or the Painter of Color. The website had many paintings that resembled the one that he had, but all of them were in linear perspective style. The website also had two names at the bottom. The names were Jose Sanchez and Adamo Baki. This led the man to Google, but for some reason all the results for Adamo led to Jose, so he decided to start his research with Jose. Jose Sanchez had a Wikipedia page, and it turns out that he was murdered when he was 40, bludgeoned to death. The killer was never identified, but it was believed to be Adamo. Adamo would go to court twice and be found innocent both times. There turned out to be a witness that saw Adamo at the crime scene, at a bar, and at a golf course. This is where the story gets a little bit weird to me. Adamo was later murdered. His house burned down with him inside. The only thing that survived the flame was a painting. A trial is being held for the murder of Adamo, and then Adamo walks in and admits to killing himself. This whole reveal feels like it was supposed to be important, but it just felt distracting. Maybe the paintings were coming to life and killing people. Maybe this story was poorly translated. I'm not sure. All I know is that it started off interesting, but then became kinda confusing. Another short creepypasta is, can I stay in your room? Mommy, can I stay in your room tonight? The walls won't stop staring at me. I sighed and rolled out of bed. There's nothing in your room, go back to sleep. But they won't stop staring at me. Come on. I take Will by the hand and guide him back to his room. Walls can't see, Will. They don't have eyes. Mine do. They do, and they keep looking at me. We cross the threshold of his doorway. I set him up on his bed. Pictures of family, past and present, are all hung up and clustered around the room. See, look? Will points to one of the pictures across from his bed, a large portrait of his great-great-grandmother, long deceased. Due to the way the picture was taken, she seems to stare at whatever the picture faces, in this case, Will's bed. That's just an old picture. I can't change that it looks like she's staring. Can you take it down, please? I sigh. Sure. I reach to pull down the old portrait. Her eyes slowly lock with mine. Short and sweet. Not much more to say, really. On to the next one. The Painting is a creepypasta that was uploaded to creepypasta.com in 2012. It's a fairly basic story, but also pretty short. I'm going to narrate it in full. There once was a young artist named Eliza. She was haunted all her life by disturbing dreams. One dream in particular made her dread sleep. It was always the same, a dark hallway and an evil clown pursuing her. Eliza was exhausted from her broken sleep. She was afraid to fall asleep. When she finally drifted off to sleep, she awoke screaming. Her friends and family begged her to get help. She finally decided she couldn't take it anymore and got an appointment with a therapist. Her therapist suggested she paint her dreams. She told Lisa, when you face your fears, you take away their powers. Lisa was doubtful, but willing to do anything to stop the awful dreams. She went home and started painting. She wasn't happy with her first attempt. Something wasn't right. She kept working until the very late of night, then decided to go to sleep. She got in bed and expected to toss and turn as always. The next thing she knew, it was morning. Lisa was shocked. She hasn't slept so easily since she was a child. She was glad but not excited. She thought it was just a fluke. She got up and brushed her teeth and made some coffee. While she waited for the coffee to brew, she started to work on the painting she had been working on. Something just wasn't working. When she got home from work that day, she started to work on the painting again. Then she knew it was wrong. The eyes. She hadn't got the eyes right. But the part of the dream that was always the most vivid were the eyes. So why was she having such a hard time getting them on canvas? For months, Lisa would stay up late working on the clown's eyes until they were just right. The more she worked, the better she slept. Finally, after months of trying, Lisa made her clown's eyes look as hateful and disturbing as the one in her dreams. After her final brushstroke, something began to happen. The clown from her painting actually began to come out of the painting. Lisa screamed and ran, but tripped over some paint buckets. The last thing Lisa saw was a clown above her wielding a knife, just like the one in her nightmares. When the police found her body, they noticed the piece of art she had been working on. According to the police chief, the painting showed a dark, empty hallway. Another short creepypasta. This story was credited to Dylan Kame Espenson, and I don't think it's a bad story, but it definitely feels lacking. The writing is a whole issue that I won't be going into. Instead, we'll be just talking about the substance of the story. The idea is there, with the girl drawing her nightmares into reality. I kind of like the ending with the clown being gone, but we already knew it would be since we were told the clown crawled out of the painting. If they cut to the part of the story with Lisa being found dead and the clown missing from the painting, I think it would flow a lot better. Still a story that with a few adjustments could be something that we would tell around a campfire. The Wanderer is a creepypasta that was posted on the Creepypasta Wiki in 2010. The story is written like an old urban legend, with an object that causes distress for those that view it. This creepypasta goes through one such tragedy with a girl named Jane. Back in the 1990s, Jane took her own life after seeing an image from a news group. This image didn't have a source. The image depicts a shot of an empty road surrounded by trees. In the middle of the road stands a feminine figure that's translucent to the point that the only way the legs are visible is from the light reflecting from the offset of the camera. It doesn't matter if the image comes from headlights or a flashlight, the thought of coming across this thing with its spider-like arms is terrifying. The figure named the Wanderer was first sighted in 1996 by a college girl named Jane. During a visit with her family, she saw it on an internet board with the caption, "Do you see me? I see you." The reaction to this image was varied. Some grew ill by looking at it, and others just thought it was funny. It wasn't uncommon for images to be posted like this to internet boards. Jane's reaction, though, was more negative. According to her family, she suffered nightmares. She would claim she would see the Wanderer outside her window. Sometimes it would move along the grass, other times it would just stand there. She would find herself unable to move, and if she closed her eyes, she would still be able to see it. Her family tried their best to comfort her and tell her that it wasn't real. This wasn't how she saw it, however. Even in her waking life, it was everywhere. It was following her. It knew her. Jane's family began to grow concerned with her sanity. They were correct to be concerned, as she would start to fight to stay awake as long as she could. First, it started like any all-nighter. She would drink a lot of caffeine and try to stay active. She would later go on to more extreme ways to stay awake by harming herself. This only increased her mom's concern. Jane's mom decides she needs to go check on her and knocks on her door, but is confused when she doesn't get a response. She opens the door to find Jane with a slit across her neck and a note that read, "It won't get me now." The Wanderer is pretty short and provides a story with an image. The story is pretty standard, but the image really brings the piece together. I think the image is ominous and spooky in its own right as well. I don't have much more to say about this one, so let's just move on to the next entry. Have You Seen This Painting of a Hallway? Is a story that comes to us from the depths of Reddit on the No Sleep subreddit. It was posted by W. Dolphin in 2015 and is told in two parts. The story begins with a man telling us about how he'd received a strange painting of a hallway from his dad. His dad had bought it at some auction and thought he would like it. Not thinking much of it, but actually liking the painting, he put it in his office. The painting depicted a hallway with 6 doors and a path that led towards the rest of the house. One day when the narrator had some friends over, they walked into his office to watch some videos on the computer. Mark, the narrator's friend, stops and looks at the painting. Mark claims that the painting is kind of creepy. The narrator doesn't agree and instead says that it's kind of hypnotizing. As the two are looking over the painting, the narrator notices something he didn't see before. There appeared to be a light at the end of the hallway in the painting. It was enough light to cast a bit of a shadow. He thought that was odd, but nothing to really concern himself about. A couple of days later, while working in his office, he glanced over the painting and saw something that sent a chill down his spine. The painting now had 7 doors. The painting's proportions hadn't changed in the slightest, and the door looked like it fit there perfectly. The man tried to explain this to his wife, the weird changes in the painting, but she didn't believe him. How could she? She wasn't even looking at the painting most days. The man decides to monitor the painting more closely to notice any changes. He even takes pictures of it at the request of his friend Mark. Nothing happened for a few days, but sure enough, a change did happen. The narrator walked into his office and there was a vaguely humanoid shape staring at him in the painting. This creeped him out so much that he decided to throw the painting out altogether. He placed it next to the trash can to get taken out in the morning. With it gone, he had some peace of mind back, until he remembers the photo he took of it. Curiosity got the better of him and he opened the image to notice that it had changed too. The thing in the image now had its arms raised. He sent the image to Mark, but the image said it was corrupted and he couldn't even view it. The creature in the painting inching closer and closer to the front. The painting continues to change, but something catches his eye that isn't related to the creature. One of the doors is now open, and inside you can see a lion's stuffed animal. This caught him off guard as the change had been there before, but it hadn't really dawned on him. The man closes the photo and goes to put his daughter to bed. That's when he sees the same lion's stuffed animal on her floor near her closet. He subtly shuts the door and moves her dresser to block entry. He grabs the lion from the floor and hands it to his daughter, before putting her to bed. When he checked the painting again, he saw that the door was now closed and the lion was no longer there. The paranoia of the painting starts to get to him as he starts to fight with his wife more about it. Eventually she says that she is going to stay with her parents for a while until he can stop obsessing over the painting. He says that he should take some time off too, but knows that he can't due to work. His wife and daughter leave and have to stay in a hotel as their parents' house is a 2-day drive. The man feels helpless but decides to try and relax a little. That's when he gets an email from his friend Mark, telling him to look at the painting again. The email had a picture of the painting attached, and there were now 8 doors. Walking into the 8th door were his wife and daughter. The creature from before was just behind them. When he asked Mark about the image, the only reply he got was, "See you soon." The narrator immediately called his wife. She answered and said that it was perfect timing as they just got to the hotel. They were just about to head down to the pool before it closed. He didn't know how to tell her about the painting since she probably wouldn't believe him anyways. He was about to tell her to leave the hotel when she said they were going to the pool now and hung up the phone. Later that night, the narrator received a phone call from a police officer. His wife and daughter were found dead in the pool. It was said to be an accident. He knew better though, and headed towards the closet. He was ready now to face the creature in the painting. That's Have You Seen This Painting of a Hallway? There are a plethora of haunted painting stories on No Sleep, but this one stood out to me. It's a good story with some good build-up. I like the ending of the story as well, as it really sets up what this creature was going to do. This painting kind of feels like an SCP to me, and that has me very interested. I just wish there was some sort of imagery attached to the creepypasta. The Smiling Man is another creepypasta that isn't really about the story itself, at least not for why it's on this iceberg. The creepypasta has an interesting history on the internet, where it started on Reddit before becoming a creepypasta. I just want to talk about this image that's attached to the Smiling Man creepypasta. This image has been burned into my mind since I first saw it 10 plus years ago. It has always invoked a kind of fright in me. I don't want to go into full details about this story as I think the Smiling Man would work better on my creepypasta cryptids iceberg. The Smiling Man is just a creepy encounter with a really creepy image attached. The last creepypasta on this tier is one that I've seen being mentioned a lot in my comments section. I know this story is pretty popular and should probably be in the first or second tier. It's one that I'd actually forgotten about for some reason, especially since the story is pretty good. Teeth.JPG was posted on the Creepypasta Wiki in 2013. It's one of the first stories to get Creepypasta of the Month and is looked fondly upon by most of the Creepypasta Wiki users. Though if you go into the comments section, it's pretty divisive. The story of Teeth.JPG starts with our narrator explaining that they attend an art college. They attend with their 3 friends/roommates. They are Josh, Lily, and Daniel. The narrator explains a bit about each person's artistic interests, but talks about how weird Daniel is. Daniel is weird, but also snobby about his art. He is referred to as a fine artist here. The story picks up after a summer vacation when all the friends return to college and explain what they did over the break. Everyone did mostly normal stuff, except for Daniel. His father is a doctor, and so he went to the hospital with him a lot during the summer. For some reason, he explains that he likes to touch teeth. The 4 friends thought this was odd, but that's just who Daniel was. A little time later, they were all enjoying their time together until Daniel started to become rude. He would insult the others and just generally start to keep to himself. The narrator and Josh were planning a night out and invited both Daniel and Lily. Lily said she would try and get Daniel to come and not to wait for her. The other 2 left and had a fun night out. When they returned, they saw that Lily wasn't in her room and neither was Daniel in his. The narrator was a bit nosy and decided to knock on Daniel's door to see if he was inside. To his surprise, the door just came open. Inside was Daniel's laptop just sitting on his bed. That's when he came upon an image file titled Teeth.JPG. He opened the file and this is the image he saw. The next day, Daniel returned to his room. When he left for lectures again, the narrator decided to show Josh the strange photo he found. They decided they needed to show Lily too, but found out she was still gone. When inspecting her room, they found her phone. They called her girlfriend and found that she hadn't talked to her either. She sent her one text that read, "Help me." The 2 decided to confront Daniel as he was the last one to see her. The confrontation was as you'd expect, awkward and aggressive. It was clear that Daniel knew more than he was letting on. The narrator and Josh later dug through Daniel's satchel after he'd stormed off into his room. In the satchel, they found a group of photos of Lily smiling with strange phrases on the back. Also inside the satchel was a ticket for 2 with an address. It would take a few hours to get there, and they decided to go first thing in the morning, while Daniel was in class. The drive took them to a rural part of their area, and specifically to an old worn building. They couldn't figure out how to enter the building until Josh accidentally kicked away a fake part of the wall. This led them down the stairs into a cellar. They entered with trepidation and were immediately hit with a foul odor. Continuing on, they found something they weren't ready for. It was Lily strapped down to a medical table. Her face was contorted with her hand sewn to it. It resembled that image they'd seen on Daniel's computer. The blackness of her mouth and eyes were caused by black wax placed inside them. Just as they were realizing what Daniel had done for the sake of his art, the door behind them closed. Josh had passed out from the adrenaline, and the narrator found himself with no way out. Just as they were imagining how they would meet their end, they heard Lily choking. That's the end of Teeth.JPG. This story won Pasta of the Month back in 2014 and was a really interesting tale. I will say this story has a lot of plot holes and inconsistencies that hold it back when held under a lens. The biggest to me is how the picture ended up on Daniel's computer so quickly. The time it took them to get home from drinking and then find that image was so quick. I just don't see how Daniel would have time to go and do this to Lily and then come back with his computer already. Unless the image was some art piece and he decided he wanted to recreate it with a real person. I thought the story overall was decent and I really liked that first image. It is memorable and likely to stick with you longer than the story itself. Most of the horror of the story came from this photo. There was also some body horror thrown in, but honestly I am not that scared of body horror. I will take more of this imagery any day though. Sometimes there are stories that are not the most well written, but the picture attached makes them worth checking out. That's the case for our next story, Check the Camera. Check the Camera was uploaded to the Creepypasta Wiki in 2011. The story starts with your usual haunted house cliches, hearing footsteps coming up the stairs at night, tapping on windows, and someone walking into other rooms. The sounds didn't really bother the narrator, but really bothers her son. She would wake up some mornings with him lying on her floor. Eventually, even her partner starts to hear noises. There was never anything there when he went to look, though. It was driving him mad. One day, her partner got scratched by whatever entity was haunting them. To skip a bit of the story, eventually her son takes his own life and tells her that he got the creature. She just needs to check the camera. This was the only photo on the roll. Now, I've seen some pretty creepy photos on the internet, but this one activates my fight or flight response. I have an irrational fear of being watched from a window, and this taps so heavily into that. The image is just very creepy overall, though the story is not so great.
SCP-895. SCP-895 is an interesting SCP for one specific reason: the live feed. Firstly, here is the description for 895. SCP-895 is an ornate oak-covered coffin recovered from the mortuary by SCP personnel on following reports of unusual footage captured by surveillance equipment installed at that location. When questioned, mortuary staff were unable to determine the source of SCP-895 and how it was transported to the location. Upon attempting to open SCP-895, agents on the location found the object empty. However, observers viewing the live camera feed were data expunged. Until further notice, SCP-895 must remain closed at all times. SCP-895 causes disruptions in video and photographic surveillance equipment within 50 meters, similar to vivid disturbing hallucinations, with variable duration and regularity corresponding to the camera's proximity. Within a range of 5 meters from SCP-895, footage captured can cause severe psychological trauma and hysteria in most subjects. These disruptions do not extend to observers physically present within the area. If you go to the SCP-895 page, you'll see a live feed that changes every so often. Sometimes it'll look pretty normal, and other times it can get very gruesome. This is a cool use of the format, and I like seeing the changes on the live feed.
Ashbrooke Lane is a creepypasta based on the strange trend of weird things being found on Google Images. This story was posted on the Creepypasta Wiki in 2014. The story starts with the narrator recalling his time spent in a house on Ashbrooke Lane. His only real memories are of a big tree on the lawn, playing with his He-Man toys, and hanging out with the neighbor kid. His strongest memories weren't so innocent, however. He remembered he would have vivid nightmares that would happen every night. In these nightmares, he would remember waking up in the early hours of the day, feeling the presence of something lurking in the darkness of his room. He would feel the bed shake and then he would go stiff, afraid to make any movement. He could hear this raspy breathing move from the foot of his bed to the side of his bed, before stopping for a moment. Until a man's breath hit his face. A skinny man in a lab coat would stand before him, with a horrific expression. He tried to scream, but the man in the lab coat grabbed his throat with fingers so skinny you could see the bone. The man ripped him out of his bed and dragged him as he fought to break free. The rest was blurry. He remembered waking up in his parents' bed. They told him he was sleepwalking. These nightmares didn't cease. He would remember waking up and going through it all again the following night. He started to work himself up so much over these nightmares that his parents took notice and let him stay up one night watching TV with them. He didn't go to bed that night. Instead, he sat on the stairs watching the grandfather clock and waiting for the man to appear. Suddenly, a part of the wall started to open up, revealing a doorway. The man came out of it. This time, however, he had blood on his coat. He watched as the man slowly put on his rubber gloves and grabbed a scalpel from his pack. The narrator would run up the stairs as the man behind was chasing. He ran into his parents' bedroom before he could reach their bed, was snatched up by the man, and dragged away from the bed. He grabbed onto the door handle, and despite all the efforts from the man, he could not pull him away. The man from his back pocket pulled out a scalpel, causing the narrator to let go of the doorknob. The man still stabbed him in the hand with a scalpel, and he tried to scream, but nothing came out. The man continued to drag him until the grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single chime, and suddenly, he abandoned his fight. He couldn't tell if everything was in his mind or if anything was actually happening to him at night. He told his parents that all they could do was reassure him. While it wasn't enough since the man would come after him almost every night anyways, the man was growing more violent each night as well. He would use the scalpel on his fingers or under his fingernails, and he would bite his fingers as well sometimes. His greatest fear was being dragged all the way into that room behind the clock and having the wall close behind him. Would he be stuck there with no one able to find him? The nightmares continued until his family finally moved in with his nan for a while. Later, he would ask his parents about the house. His mother said she had weird dreams while in that house. His dad, however, stopped them from talking about it. When he was in his mid-20s, he asked his parents about the house again. This time they were more perceptive. His mother had visions of dead bodies lying on the floor, blood all over the walls, and she claimed she had felt a presence. While alone, she would often hear crying from inside the house. She also revealed that his aunt and uncle had come to stay one weekend and woke in the middle of the night to see the figure of a tall man wandering the room. The building was on sale again, and he decided now was the time to revisit the house. A lady named Andre met him for a tour of the house. As he entered, he felt a shiver down his spine. As they toured the building, he would come across the part of the house where the man used to try and drag him. The narrator gestured toward the wall and asked her what used to be behind that wall. She was caught off guard and started to tell him a clearly fabricated story. It didn't take long for her to realize that he knew more than she originally believed. He told her that he used to live in the house when he was a kid. She agreed to tell him the story, but not in the house. The two went to a nearby coffee shop, and she explained the origins of the house. In 1953, Dr. Henry Fenton moved into Ashbrooke Lane with his wife Mary and their teenage son Raymond. The upper floors of the house were where the rooms were set up. His office was set just off the hallway opposite the grandfather clock. Business and life were going well for them until Mary fell down the stairs and broke her neck, killing her instantly. Henry grew distant following this tragedy and started to focus solely on his work and ignore his son. Raymond was struggling to come to terms with his mother's death, his father ignoring him, and his mother's death caused a divide in the family. Raymond soon fell in with the wrong crowd, turning to drugs and alcohol for relief. Henry didn't care or even notice. He was too busy either working or drinking. The drinking led to anger. Henry would throw things around and destroy furniture, though it was his son who bore the brunt of his temper most of the time. This would lead to Raymond leaving to live with his grandparents. One night, Henry was awoken by a noise downstairs. He had been drinking, so emboldened, he decided to confront the intruder. All he had left was his work, and no one was going to take that away from him. He saw a light in another room, as well as the noise of someone rummaging through the cupboards and shelves. Henry snuck into the office and withdrew a scalpel from his drawer. The intruder entered the room. He had a sack on his back and wore a mask. Henry sprung out of the darkness, ordering the robber to drop the sack. The robber panicked and tried to run past him, but Henry would catch the man in the neck with the scalpel. He walks to unmask the robber, and it's Raymond, his son. Henry tried to save his son, immediately applying medical aid. Henry puts his hands on Raymond's throat to stop the bleeding. He then dragged him towards his office. He would try to perform emergency operations, but it was too late. As Raymond was pronounced dead, the grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single chime. The following day, patients turned up to his office to find Raymond cradled in Dr. Fenton's arms. Unable to come to terms with killing his own son, Henry had turned the scalpel upon himself, slashing his own wrists before bleeding to death on the floor of his office. The narrator knew that something was wrong with that house, and it all made sense to him now. In an update, he decided to look at the house on Google Maps. The building looked the same except for an added ramp. Looking closely, he saw what he'd been dreading. In the reflection of the door was the face he'd seen so many times in his nightmares. Ashbrooke Lane is a new take on a classic horror story. A house is haunted following a tragic event that happened prior to the person moving in. This one is told well and paced just as well. The story of the doctor taking his own son's life was something I kinda saw coming, but it still had the intended effect. The image from Google Maps at the end of the story looks pretty convincing, which is nice. The image of the doctor and the reflection adds a lot to the story. The images here were used pretty well, I think. I really enjoy it when images are either at the end or beginning of a story.
The Buildings on Moor Lane is a creepypasta that was uploaded to the wiki in 2019 by user DavidBlack123. It tells a story of these strange abandoned buildings near where they live. The author, who we'll call David, tells of his experience with these buildings. He starts his story by describing the buildings. The buildings are surrounded by 4 roads: Victoria Street, Sizer Street, Ashmore Street, and the main road, Moor Lane. The abandoned site consists of 3 buildings with a courtyard in between them. These are now being used as a drug den, off and on. However, I am sure there is something much more sinister, much more evil, lurking in those buildings. I visited them a year ago out of interest for urban exploration for a few days. The first terrifying experience I had took place in the middle 2-story building with the broken windows. Every part of the story David is recounting has an image of a building to go along with it. This first building he's describing is the first one he entered. Inside, he found signs of drug use, but not a single person. While being completely sure he was alone, he heard footsteps heading towards him. Deciding he needed to get out of there, he ran from the building. Once outside, David stopped to catch his breath, only to hear the footsteps getting louder again. Whoever, or whatever it was, had followed him outside. He started running again, and he didn't stop until reaching the safety of an enclosed building. David would come back to the buildings to do more urban exploration a few weeks later. This is the second building that he would explore. Giving a quick history of the building, he explained what it was used for then and how it's mostly just a drug den now. While on the top floor of the building, he heard those same footsteps from before, but this time with an added bonus. Whatever it was got closer this time than the last. And what he heard was a dreadful, moaning sound. It sounded like a creature mourning the dead, or death itself. David wasted no time in racing out of the building. Luckily for him, he never actually saw whatever had made that noise or had it see him. That was the last time he ever stepped foot in those buildings on Moor Lane. He does say that if you want to explore those buildings, as they've been blocked off now, you can still climb the trash can in this image to make it over the wall. The Buildings on Moor Lane is a pretty simple creepypasta. It tells of an urban explorer that has some otherworldly encounters. The encounters are grounded though, as we never actually see what it is that the author is experiencing. The images give a good sense of location and really add to the story. The grounded nature of the story is fine and makes it all a little more believable. But if they had actual images of the insides of these buildings, the tension and believability would have been higher. Not the scariest story, but one that I think delivers its themes decently.
Cursed Images refers to a subset of image memes that started appearing on the internet in 2015. A cursed image is an image that is meant to unsettle, upset, or disturb the viewer. These images are considered to be a form of visual creepypasta and spread just as quickly. The origin of cursed images is a new one for the channel, as we've seen stories and creepypastas emerging from 4chan, Reddit, Something Awful, and YouTube, but this one is the first one to come from Tumblr. An account simply titled Cursed Images was created in 2015 and posted this image. This was the first ever use of the term when attached to an image, which would lead to the trend going forward. A year later, the trend would leave Tumblr and migrate to Twitter when a gimmick account named Cursed Images was created in 2016. The account gained an astounding 100,000 followers before going dormant. The success of this account started the spread of cursed images, as mainstream news channels picked up on the trend and started to report on it. Let's take a look at some notable cursed images. This is what nightmare fuel looks like. An image of a man hanging from the ceiling. Well, the shape of a man anyway. These baby-faced macarons look so off-putting. Is it the tiny, realistic faces or the fact that they're skin-colored? Would you eat these? I probably would. I love macarons. This looks like an image you'd find in your own family photo album. A forgotten memory that really makes you question why it exists. It also makes you wonder what phobia you gained from this. Cursed images would continue to garner a following and even be responsible for the rise of popularity of liminal spaces.
Album was uploaded to the Creepypasta Wiki in 2018 by the author, Hopeless Night Owl. The creepypasta is rather short, so we'll be going through it together. Whenever we visit my grandpa's house, I always look at the old photo albums. I've been doing it since I was 11. I'm 15 now. I always find them strangely intriguing. My whole family history contained within these archives. There are wedding albums, vacation albums, holiday albums, all kinds of albums. I especially like seeing what my aunts and uncles looked like before I was born. My favorite ones, however, are the ones that date back even further, like the ones that contain my grandpa's old army photos, and the ones from when he was a kid. I have always been a history buff, but my favorite one of all is the oldest. This one has pictures from the 1870s all the way up till the 1890s. Photography for special occasions was obviously a lot more formal back then. In every photo, the subject is dressed in his or her Sunday best. The subject is almost always alone. He or she is always sitting, and they generally look very uncomfortable. One of them, the teenage girl with the missing arm, who I think I might be starting to develop a little crush on, which is kind of screwed up considering she may very well be my great-great-aunt or something. Back in the 19th century, I guess they weren't allowed to smile for photos. They all have this blank look on their face. All the makeup doesn't help either. Makes them look rather pale. Another thing I noticed, as far as I can tell, no subject ever appears twice in the album.
SCP-2808 is a really interesting concept for an SCP. The description for 2808 is the following. Descriptions of SCP-2808 itself are incomprehensible in the context of official documentation. A similar effect occurs with visual representations. Any action taken regarding SCP-2808 in the course of an individual's position in a bureaucratic structure results in the immediate alteration of that position to beautifier, which entails the often violent subversion of standard operating procedure with the goal of producing aesthetically appealing artworks. The subject's original position and job responsibilities are impossible to fill or carry out, as attempts result in overwhelming visual hallucinations of abstract patterns. The effects of SCP-2808 is visual abstract hallucinations. The reason I'm talking about this SCP isn't because of the effects of the SCP though. On the actual page for this SCP, the image that is attached changes every time you refresh the page. The changes aren't that creepy, but it plays well into what the SCP is supposed to do, give you abstract hallucinations. Children of Mirth is a creepypasta that was written by Moriarty Croxworth. The story was first posted to the Some Ordinary Gamers wiki under the name of Mirth, before being posted onto the creepypasta wiki with Children of Mirth. The story has a really interesting premise and use of its imagery. It might even be one of the earliest stories to use this particular type of imagery. The story begins with an excerpt from the author that reads, "I loved horrifying images. Pictures that could make one feel uneasy or even utterly terrified fascinated and delighted me. Yet for all my appreciation and exposure, they worked their charms exceptionally well on me. I had trouble falling asleep most nights with the visions of these nightmarish things invading my mind and leaving it a smoldering wreck. From horror games to internet screamers to the illustrations of scary stories to tell in the dark. I had a host of things in my head to keep me up at night. I was enthralled and terrified by nearly all of them. The only exceptions were the images I'd created." The author explains that he loved messing around in Photoshop when he was in high school. He would make photo alterations as that was what most interested him about the program. Most of the images were comical, but what he really wanted to do was make images that were terrifying. The author loved to spread scary stories. He was often the guy that people would go to if they wanted to hear a spooky story. It wasn't enough for him though. He wanted to scare people in more ways. One day the author started up Photoshop, turned to a song he liked, and began to work. He found this image of George Marks and started to manipulate it. In 40 minutes, he transformed the image from this to this. He gave the image an inhumanly long mouth, covered the eyes with more of his skin, and added a little filter over it. Here's another excerpt from the story. "I was in love. A habit began to form. Like a drug, I became addicted to creating these abominations in Photoshop. I relished the horror of the images I'd made. I showed them around and received similar aghast reactions from every last soul to gaze upon them. I relished the ease of which I could make the pictures. Most of all, I relished my absence of fear. I simply had to make more. One image every few months grew to 1 or 2 every month. From there, I began making one every week. Before I knew it, I was making one of these images almost every day. As time wore on, I began referring to these images as my children. I had a folder filled with dozens of my children named Mirth. I loved them dearly. They were macabre, hellish, and all mine." The author describes it best, but his love for these images was starting to become an obsession. He felt empty when he wasn't creating them and needed to be around them constantly. This led to him hearing faint whispers while away from them. This led to the author starting to mutter strange phrases uncontrollably. He would say things like, "Why aren't you laughing? You should be laughing." This escalated but didn't seem to bother people as they just assumed he was eccentric. That was until the screaming started. The author would start screaming uncontrollably. He would hear the voices of his children and then stop. This earned him a noise complaint, but the next time it occurred was much worse. The author and his friends used to meet up at his apartment and drink and play old school video games. One night, while they were all pleasantly buzzed, he sat on the couch, watching a friend play the Super Nintendo. He had a little too much to drink and was slowly fading in and out. As he was slowly blacking out, he could hear the voices of his children. The voices of the creations were calling him, beckoning him back to them. He pushed them off for a while, but the mutterings began just as he blacked out. When he awoke, he found all of his friends surrounding him on his bed. His creations were all ripped and crumpled in a pile on the floor. His friends told him that he got up and started yelling, "Why aren't you laughing?" The friend playing the Super Nintendo had tried to talk to him, but he was grabbed by the throat. His friends then watched as he thrashed around for 20 minutes. This led them to removing the creations from his walls and placing him in his room. They then deleted all of the images off his laptop and asked him to seek help, which he agreed he would. The author sees a therapist and is able to get some help, but not the immediate help that he was hoping for. When he got home, he taped up the rest of his creations on the wall and pulled out a flash drive from his dresser. He had backed up his files and he wouldn't be away from his children for much longer. The author starts flipping through every horror that he'd created. He felt at home, at peace, but also like something was wrong. He was hearing voices as he scrolled through the images. They were saying, "We loved you, we trusted you, and Father, love us." Another strange thing, he had created thousands of images over the years, but he noticed there was one that he hadn't made near the bottom. Here's an excerpt from the end of the story. "The last photo was of me. It was amazing. It was in full color. My eyes were sewn shut, and my jaw stretched far below my neck. My lips were peeled back in mirth to expose long, discolored teeth. It was beautiful, brilliantly executed, and it made me scream. I didn't make this. I didn't. I'm not sure what exactly happened after that. The line between reality and delusion blurred. My mind completely derailed. The photo on the screen twisted and contorted at grotesque angles and in inhuman fashions. "Love us again," it shouted in a tremulous, inhuman voice. I fell out of my chair, wailing. I landed on my back and stared up at my walls, from where all my children stared down and laughed. In unison, they all began to chant. "We do not love you anymore, Father. Why aren't you laughing?" They bellowed. They laughed and screamed, and their blank eyes ripped open to drip blood onto my face. Their faces drew closer and closer to mine. I knew it had to be a psychotic delusion, but was it? How could I be so sure? The first of my children took to the front of the horde, and its gaping maw enveloped my head. The screams were muffled by the void, my vision went black. And I woke up in my bed. There were no screams now, only whispers. I could still hear my children whispering to me. Their voices slipped into my ears ever so gently. "We don't love you. You should be laughing. Laugh, Father." I laughed. I laughed for what felt like hours until I passed out from exhaustion. My life since has been pretty uneventful. I eventually found work in a small graphic design firm, and my life has been quiet. Still, some nights I hear my children calling to me from the darkness of my room. Laugh. This story was written during the peak of creepypasta culture. The real draw of the story are the edited images. These images look like they came straight out of the Mandela catalog. They are unsettling and inhuman, which makes them perfect horror imagery. Not many image-based creepypastas use their imagery this well. As far as I can tell, these images were created for this story, and not the other way around. Usually a creepypasta will use an image to represent itself, but this appears to be an image created for the story to coincide with what's happening. I would have preferred of having multiple of these edits to see, but the one that we got is pretty eerie, so I'll take it. Also, I should note that this story technically has 2 different endings, but I went with the one that was on the creepypasta wiki. The ending was changed in 2020, and this is the one the author seems to like more anyways.
Do you see it too? Is a creepypasta posted by Tawawe onto the Creepypasta Wiki in 2022. This is a newer story and focuses on an image. The image contains something that you just have to look a little closer to see. The story opens up with our narrator explaining how they came upon this photo, and how they couldn't find whatever they were supposed to see. The image looked pretty ordinary. The post had a lot of views but little to no comments. The OP posted that there was nothing in the picture, but the highest upvoted comment said, "Yes, there is. You just haven't seen it yet." This comment had the most upvotes but not a single response under it. The author decides to send the image to their friend Dylan. Dylan was known to get fixated on these sort of things, and he thought it would be funny to see his reaction. It was funny. For the first 5 minutes, Dylan kept looking at the photo and became obsessed with it pretty quickly. This led to Dylan leaving their living room and rushing into his room. Inside, he appeared to be staring at his computer screen at the image. This was starting to worry the author, but he really needed to sleep so he could get ready for work the next day. The next morning, the author wakes up and makes bacon and eggs. He hoped that Dylan would come out to the smell of breakfast, but not a sound came from his room. The author walked over and was about to knock when he heard Dylan tell him to go away. The author confronted Dylan but was promptly told to go away. He was worried about his friend but needed to go to work. When he got off and arrived home, he found that all of the sinks in the house were on. The author then turned them off, and Dylan came running out of his room to turn them back on. Dylan stated that he needed the sound on to concentrate. He aggressively made his way back to his room and slammed the door. The author, not feeling safe, decided to stay the night at his girlfriend's house. Early the next morning, he found messages from Dylan, about a dozen of them. They all stated that he'd found what he was looking for in the photo. The author, against his better judgment, decided he needed to go back to his apartment. When he arrived, he called out Dylan's name but got no response. He slowly opened his door to find his computer on, and the picture open. Dylan wasn't there, but a quick glance at the image, and the author swears he saw him for a moment. He doesn't want to look, but something seems so alluring about taking a peek at Dylan's computer screen. He swore he saw something. He just needs to look a little harder to find it. Here's the image. Do you see anything? You just have to look really hard. It's there.
The expired film pack was uploaded to the Creepypasta Wiki as of July 2013. It was uploaded by user Dezohen Valentine. This is another short story, so we'll read it together. I don't know about you, but I always liked instant cameras. They had this form of memorabilia that no other form of media had. Well, I decided to buy myself a Polaroid impulse camera at the time. I truly thought it was a nice investment, although the film was expensive. Nowadays, a company named Impossible Project creates film for this type of camera, and is also a guarantee that it works. Of course, on eBay, the more antique, expired films are also up for sale, but at extremely high prices. With the extra money I had from work and allowance, I was able to buy an Impossible Project and an expired twin pack for a fairly good price. To tell you the truth, I now regret buying the expired film. The Impossible film worked perfectly, so perfectly that I was able to go through a whole pack within a month. At this point, I had to start on the first pack of the expired film. On my mom's day off work, I decided to take the first photo of my mom. At this point, there were no signs of color, fading, smearing, or any defects of any kind. Just as a precaution, I put the film inside the box where it contained the other pack. Then I went outside. Around the time I came home, it was dusk and a perfect temperature to take out the film. What I saw nearly dropped me on the floor. It was my mother in the most gruesome image I have ever seen. Her face was torn apart. She was grabbing the skin of her face in her left hand. Her legs were abused and showing hints of bone here and there. Her shirt ripped apart and showing organs that seemed to be falling to the floor and hanging freely. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't understand how a simple photo of my mom smiling innocently distorted into this. These weren't any positions the original developing film was turning into. I started sobbing and cut the photo in half. My mom never asked what happened to the photo, even when she did see me crying, and I don't plan on telling her anything. I have 9 more films in the pack, 19 in total. I have not taken a picture ever since. I don't plan to, and surely not to buy any more expired film online anymore. Expired Film Pack is an excellent short creepypasta. It has a unique angle, and then explains a bit of its intentions. In this case, how instant film works. The story doesn't get too gory, other than describing the picture. The story could have gone further, but it feels fine at the length it is. Unexplainable photograph. This picture was taken on a mobile phone. The little girl you see crying refused to go into the group, as she said the little boy was scaring her. Thinking very little of her tantrum, the little girl's mother took the photo away. She later discovered what the child was crying about. Look closely, about knee-high between the second and third girl from the left. That, I suspect, is the reason the little girl was crying.
Ghost photos refers to all those images where people claim to have caught sight of a ghost. These images have been used as proof that ghosts exist for many years and have undergone heavy scrutiny from skeptics and believers alike. Let's take a look at some of the most popular ghost images online. This first image is from the 1950s and shows an apparition in the top left side of the picture. The people in the photo are completely unaware of the ghostly intruder now photobombing them. The appearance of the ghost makes it hard to figure out what exactly it could be. Here's an image of a military group with the man circled being an unexpected guest. This man had died a few days before this image was taken, but there he is. He just wanted one last photo with his comrades. This next image is a very popular one and one that I've seen many times. This is a ghostly image of John Defoe, a boy that was killed in the infamous house in Amityville. This picture was taken by Ed and Lorraine Warren, some of the most famous paranormal experts. The kid in the image was killed by his older brother along with the rest of his family. These events inspired the Amityville horror movies. This is said to be the last image of the boy. There are a lot of these ghost images all over the internet. In fact, one could make an entire channel dedicated to just finding all these images. Whether these images are real ghost sightings is up for speculation and discussion. Has anyone ever used ExpressionCaptioner? Is a short creepypasta that came from a Reddit post on No Sleep. The story was posted by IIA. The story will be read in full. Has anyone else used ExpressionCaptioner? You know, that interactive meme site that takes pics with your webcam and makes captions at the top and bottom of the image. My girlfriend showed it to me the other day. We were pretty impressed by how well the software picks up on facial expressions and makes captions based on what the algorithm detects. Anyway, we played around with it for a while, got bored, and then watched some Frasier reruns. Last night when I was home alone with nothing to do, I clicked over to that site again to see what kinds of captions I could get it to come up with. For a while it was no different from the other day. Right when I thought I had had enough and was ready to head out and get something to eat, the page refreshed and a new button appeared. Live caption. I clicked it. My webcam light turned on and my familiar stupid face appeared. Every 5 seconds, a still frame was captured. Like before, it was captioned. I let it caption me for a few minutes and watched the picture pool fill with thumbnails of all the captured images. I was a little disappointed. All live captions seemed to do was take away the need to click the capture image button I'd been using before. I closed the laptop and went to the burger place down the street. I stuffed myself with bacon cheeseburgers and fries, rolled myself home, and went to bed. When I got to work this morning, I opened my laptop and the website was still open. Once the Wi-Fi connected, the page automatically refreshed and the live caption resumed. It detected I was tired and captioned the first picture. Needs better pillow. Beard not fluffy enough. In my sleep-deprived state at 7 AM, I thought it was pretty funny. I let the thing run in the background while I did my work. About an hour ago, I remembered I had the site running. I checked the picture pool and it was loaded with captures of my face, along with various captions. As I scrolled through the most recent ones, though, something had changed. The captions weren't lining up with my expressions. All the ones before, despite being silly, were more or less in line with whatever I was expressing. The last ones were different and wrong. I downloaded them and put them online so they wouldn't be lost. I didn't know what to think. I was pretty sure someone was playing a joke, and I tried to send an email to the site administrator to compliment them for making such an interesting site. When I clicked the contact button at the bottom of the site, I got an error. I tried to go back, but again there was another error. I tried again to go to the site on my work computer, but I kept getting the same error, name not resolved message. So yeah, if anyone's able to get on ExpressionCaptioner.com, just let me know. The domain lookup says it isn't even registered, but I'm assuming that it's a mistake because my browser history is full of my visits to the site. I'm not a superstitious person, but I gotta say, I'm not feeling too well after all this. It's also getting pretty dark outside, but there isn't a cloud in the sky. It's not even 11 AM. The Painting in the Mirror is a creepypasta that comes from creepypasta.com and was uploaded in 2014. It was written by Thomas Sarecki and follows another unnamed narrator as they deal with their new apartment. The story opens with a man explaining how no one will likely believe him. Their hand is shaking as they write this even. You would likely write all this off as the scrawlings of a madman. It happened 6 months prior. The narrator needed a new apartment. It was becoming too expensive for him to stay at the dorms any longer. So he and his parents started looking for a new place close to the school. When they were about to give up their search, they found a small studio apartment going for under the value of the area. It seemed like a good deal, even if it was a little small. It was close to his school and there were places nearby where he could work at. They contacted the renter and were told that they would come by and look. If they liked it enough, they could even sign the lease that same day. After arriving, they were expecting to see the landlord, but instead they saw a scrawny courier. The man handed them an envelope and said if they liked the place enough, they could sign the lease and mail it back, and if not, they could just mail back the key. This all seems sketchy, but the narrator kind of had no options. He signed the lease, and even if his parents were pretty unhappy with the whole ordeal, especially his dad, they let him make his own decision. The tiny apartment didn't come with much furniture, except for a mirror that hung on the wall opposite his bed. It was a weird piece for someone to leave behind, but it wasn't that big of a deal to him. Every time he would look down at the mirror, he would see a painting reflected in it. It made him shiver. It was kind of unnerving, really. That first night he swore he saw something moving around the painting in the mirror. A week went by and school was starting up soon. It was draining on his mind, but he was also excited for it to start back up. After a long run around the neighborhood, he dropped back down to his bed and caught a glimpse of the mirror. There appeared to be movement in the mirror. It was the movement of a lopsided but tall creature. It moved so disjointedly that it was terrifying. It also had long, gangly limbs and was covered in ash-colored skin. The figure was getting closer. The narrator could see that through the mirror. It slowly shambled forward and he couldn't look anywhere but at it. He was stunned for a moment, but woke up later, not sure exactly how he had fallen asleep. He awoke to a gray light pouring in from the window. He felt groggy and disoriented, but mostly thirsty. The narrator got out of bed and ran to the bathroom to get some water. He immediately vomited. He drank the water slowly this time. That's when he saw his appearance in the mirror. He looked rough and ragged, almost sickly. There wasn't another way to describe it. After checking his phone, which was dead, he realized what was wrong. He had been asleep for a whole week. Charging his phone, he checked the fridge and found that his leftovers were moldy and the milk had gone bad. He went back to his phone and saw that he had missed a bunch of calls from his mom. He called her and reassured her that he was just fine, just a little under the weather. It took a while, but he was able to quell her anxiety a bit. The narrator's mental well-being was coming into question along with his physical one. This eventually led to him seeking out a mental health professional, and luckily the school provided one. A few sessions in, and the painting finally came up. The therapist asked him why he just didn't take the painting down if it bothered him so much. That was the first time that the narrator had actually considered this option. That night, the narrator was going through the motions of tossing and turning. Eventually, he caught his own gaze in the mirror, and his eyes drifted up to the painting. He wasn't actually sure what the painting was even depicting. He squinted his eyes to look at it, but then felt dumb. I squinted, trying to identify the vague shapes, then finally realized how stupid I was being. I sat up and twisted around in bed to look at the wall behind me. The painting wasn't there. I sat dumbfounded in that awkward position for a few moments, staring blankly at the bare wall above my head. I turned back to the mirror, dread gripping my gut like a horrid claw, and saw the painting suspended over my terrified, exhaustion-ravaged face. Back to the wall, blank whitewash. When the narrator turned back to the mirror, the creature was now in the frame. It started to slowly move towards the mirror, shambling in a disjointed way. He couldn't look away from it. Eventually the trance wore off, but that's when he realized that he couldn't move. He just had to stare at the creature slowly creeping toward him. The creature dominated the entire painting, and only then did the narrator's paralysis break. He tried to run, but the creature reached through the mirror and stuck one massive claw into his shoulder and began to pull him into the painting. The world of the painting was dark but spectral. There were faces screaming in agony all around him, but their eyes were closed. They seemed to not know that he was there. The rest of the story is told from the narrator's new home in a mental facility. He had lived the trauma of that night. Every day was harder than the last. He wasn't allowed to be near mirrors or paintings, and that was probably for the best. This story came from the one time a nurse had given him a pen and paper. He wrote it in hopes that he can convince others that he is sane. Finally, he laments on if there is an afterlife. He would prefer nothing. Anything is better than the world of the painting in the mirror. Painting in the Mirror is a good, slow burn story. I like how you go through the beats of this person's life and what actually led up to the whole experience. The narrator kept trying to live a normal life, but was haunted by some furniture that he should have removed when he first moved in. The biggest complaint is how the painting is never mentioned and then it is. Like, he looks into the mirror and doesn't see a painting originally. When he first describes his room, he specifically mentions that the only piece of furniture that was left behind was the mirror. I'm not sure if the psychosis caused by the painting was what caused this, or if it was just a lapse from the author. Either way, it's not too distracting unless you're looking to review the story.
SCP-1875. SCP-875 is a very dangerous entity that can cause a few health issues. Let me explain. SCP-1875 is a Victorian-era chess automation that actually consists of 4 parts, called SCP-1875-1, -2, -3, and -4. -1 is also split into 2 with -1A and -1B. It's a chessboard created out of metal cast in the 1800s and uses chess pieces made out of human bone. The machine itself runs off electromagnets and the brain tissue of 2 twin chess prodigies. It's a strange mix of mechanical and biological systems. The chessboard itself is pretty disturbing, and it has 5 settings of automation. These settings are likely there for difficulty. The machine has been created to have an insanely high ELO rating that could only be tested by researchers with knowledge of chess. After testing for these ELO settings, a strange email was sent to everyone in the distro for SCP-1975. The email had an image attached. The image was claimed to be of the 2 twin sisters but was morphed. This is the image that was attached to that email. It was reported that it had differing effects on a person depending on how long they stared at it for. Just being exposed would cause mild anxiety, 15 minutes, a headache, elevated body temperature, 2 hours, restlessness, insomnia, auditory hallucinations reported, often heard as a quiet childlike laughter, 4 hours, visual hallucination reported, intense anxiety, 7 hours. Subject remains conscious, though increasingly unresponsive to external stimuli, 11 hours. Brief period of lucidity. Subject appears to recover and will demand immediate access to a computer which 1875 image 1AB was viewed. 12 hours. Self-mutilation observed. 14 hours. Redacted. This image is pretty disturbing and reminds me a lot of other early internet horror imagery. It uses the distorted but vaguely human look to unsettle us. There's no telling what effect this image could have on a person's psyche, especially after that 14th hour.
The Shack in the Woods is a creepypasta that was posted to the wiki in 2013. The story centers around this image of a shack in the woods. The author begins this story by explaining that it all started when he was 15. He and his cousin found an old shack in the woods, where they lived with mostly just woods and not much else. The only real fun they had was going through the woods. On that particular day, they decided not to go towards the shack. It wasn't going anywhere, so they could explore it later. The time came only a few days later when the author and his cousin got bored one summer afternoon. The pair walked into the woods and up to the shack and found that the door wouldn't budge. While the author was examining a window, his cousin got the door open with a loud cracking sound. Inside the shack was dirty and covered in boarded up walls. The author's cousin found a sheet of metal on the ground. It looked out of place, and when the pair moved it, they found a staircase hidden beneath. The two walked down into the darkness with nothing but an iPod for light. There was a small room down the stairs. It had a bed and it was clear someone was living there. There were pictures down there as well, And this is when the author notices that the images were of him. The images went back to when he was 10 and all the way up to when they first discovered the shack in the woods. The light on the iPod went off as they were examining another photo. The sound of footsteps could be heard from behind them. The author awoke outside of the forest and immediately ran home. He didn't think about what happened until he was safe at home. That's when it occurred to him that he didn't know where his cousin was. The author's mom later informed him that his cousin was missing. The story wraps up with the author getting a package left on his doorstep. The amount of time between the prior incident and this one isn't mentioned. The box doesn't have a return address, and inside of it was a group of photos. The first photo was of the author unconscious in that dark room from before. The next showed his cousin with a huge gash in his head and blood pooling beneath him. The next photo showed his current house, and only 30 minutes prior to the delivery. There's a note at the bottom of the box that said, "I'm coming." The sound of a clicking camera from his open window is then heard. This story is one that uses its image as a premise, but doesn't really take it further than that. This is a pretty standard creepypasta, but not one that I feel many will remember. It kind of needs a real scare to it. The ending doesn't really cause me any sort of dread either. Mereana, Mordegard, Glesgorv is a classic era creepypasta and one that was quite popular. It was covered by many different creepypasta channels back in the day, and even appeared on many people's top creepypasta lists. The story is rather short, so we'll go through it together. There's a video on YouTube named Mereana, Mordegard, Glesgorv. If you search this, you will find nothing. The few times you find something, all you will see is a 20-second video of a man staring intently at you, expressionless, then grinning for the last 2 seconds. The background is undefined. This is only part of the actual video. The full video lasts 2 minutes and was removed by YouTube after 153 people who viewed the video gouged out their eyes and mailed them to YouTube's main office in San Bruno. Said people had also committed suicide in various ways. It is not yet known how they managed to mail their eyes after gouging them out. The cryptic inscription they carved on their forearms has not yet been deciphered. YouTube will periodically put up the first 20 seconds of the video to quell questions so that people will not go look for the real thing and upload it. The video itself was only viewed by one YouTube staff member who started screaming after 45 seconds. This man is now under constant sedation and is apparently unable to recall what he saw. The other people who were in the same room as him while he viewed it and turned off the video for him say all they heard at the time was a high-pitched drilling sound. None of them dared look at the screen. The person who uploaded the video was never found, the IP address being non-existent, and the man in the video has never been identified. This story is a classic, but one that I don't feel has aged very well. Aside from the eeriness of the video, the rest of the story isn't that memorable. It feels a lot like those early creepypastas though, which are part of the growing pains of the community. The Visitors is a creepypasta that was posted to the Creepypasta Wiki in 2021 for a contest. It was written by Kolpik and told the story of a girl named Hannah visiting her old school in a town named Ripley. The story starts with Hannah and her husband Alex taking a detour to a small town called Ripley. The pair pulled up to an old school building. Hannah claimed that she wanted to take a tour of her old school. She calls up the custodian to come and open the school for them. Frank, the custodian, arrives and lets them inside. Frank asks Alex to sit and chat with him while Hannah goes and explores the school. Alex obliges and watches as his wife walks off into the darkness of the building. Hannah is having some sort of flashback as she sees her old elementary school. The school was being set up with an experimental new teaching method. This method would bring in robotic teachers to teach the students. Hannah and 49 other students were brought in to take place in this experiment. The robotic teachers looked more like students with their small stature and big eyes. The robotic teachers were monitored by human teachers during their lesson plans. The test was a massive success. All 50 students saw marginal improvements in their test scores. It seemed like the school would go forward with this lesson plan until this image was put in the local paper. This image unsettled and creeped people out, so they started to pull their kids out of the program. This all led to each of the 50 kids breaking into the school once it was officially closed down and taking a souvenir. Each kid ended up doing this. Separately or together, it didn't matter, they were each drawn to do it. Seeing the school years later, she saw a figure moving in the shadows. The screen on its abdomen lit up and she knew immediately that it was her teacher, number 8. The robotic teacher addressed her by name and asked for her student module. She tried to talk to it but wasn't able to. The robots were not built for communication. They could just list random facts and lesson plans. The robot, even without being able to make facial expressions, looked tired. Hannah gave number 8 her student module and it thanked her. It sped off towards the back of the building with Hannah following close by. Inside, she saw the other robots all in the exact same position as that photo that was posted in the paper. She saw number 8 go into its position and lower its head, finally able to shut down like the rest. Hannah returned outside, thanked Frank, and set off with her husband. As they were leaving the area, she could see a smoke plume coming from the old schoolhouse. The Visitors is an interesting creepypasta in concept. It's about a woman returning to her old elementary school where something mysterious happened. The overall concept is interesting, but it isn't really all that scary. It leans more heavily into the sad or sympathetic side of storytelling. I still do like the mystery here though, like who posted that original photo in the newspaper? Why did it look exactly like the way the robots all shut down in the end? Who was paying Frank the custodian to keep the school open until every student returned their student module? The image attached is a great piece of liminal space, which is what the contest was held for, using liminal space images and creating a story around them. I like the image a lot, but the story made it less creepy. Without context, the image is much more unsettling. The ending left a bit of mystery too, so overall a good story. If you've been on the internet for a while and explored the horror side, you'll likely know the name Trevor Henderson. Trevor Henderson is an artist that's created some of the most disturbing pieces of art for the internet. You might have heard of some of his more popular works, like Cartoon Cat, Bridgeworm, Long Horse, or Siren Head. These are some of his more famous pieces, but he has created some of the most interesting and disturbing cryptids on the internet. Siren Head was one that really took off, becoming very similar to Slenderman. The creature went viral and made its way to just about every part of the internet. That doesn't mean that the others aren't just as interesting or better. Let's take a look at a few of his pieces. These pieces are some of my favorite horror art on the internet. These invoke a fight or flight response in me almost immediately, and for that, I love them. There was a time on the internet when screamers were very common. A screamer is essentially a video, image, or other piece of art on the internet that was created specifically to jump scare the viewer. The term isn't used as much now, but it used to be a pretty common thing. Now, one of the most popular screamers was a Korean comic by the name of the Bongcheon Dong Ghost. This comic was pasted as a URL in many different forums. The first time I ever experienced it was on YouTube. Someone had given me the link and I followed it. The link takes you to a webcomic. The comic starts off pretty casually with someone recounting their experience. The story starts with telling you that this story is based off of eyewitness encounters. It has a schoolgirl walking home late at night. This eventually leads to them not feeling safe as they make their way home. The further along the story goes, eventually the tension starts to pick up. This continues until you notice that you can't scroll anymore. The page starts to move on its own. The story goes until a short animation with a screamer sound effect plays. This is the Bongcheon Dong Ghost. This one honestly scared me while researching for it because I forgot about the sound effect. It is a great piece of internet history and harkens back to an era of screamers. Images with tragic backstories is a pretty common listicle topic covered by many YouTubers and news outlets. The premise is simple. Take a look at an ordinary photo. The photo looks happy or normal in just about every way, except for the story behind the photo is far darker. Take this image of a father and daughter in Omagh, Northern Ireland. This photo was taken of the car that would be part of the Omagh car bombings in 1998. The person that took this photo didn't survive, but luckily the father and daughter did. There are thousands of photos taken either right before tragedy or with someone who had done a crime prior to the image. This image shows what looks to be a father and his daughter taking a photo for picture day. The grim reality of it, though, is that it's actually an image of a man named Franklin Delano Floyd, who had kidnapped his stepdaughter, Suzanne Mary Savakis. This story goes much deeper and even has a documentary all about what happened. It shows that an image may capture a moment, but what lies beyond is what is important. A seemingly innocent photo could be taken right before an atrocity. That concludes the Image Creepypasta Iceberg. Thank you everyone for watching. This is the channel's 4th Creepypasta Iceberg and it has been a real trip down memory lane for me. Starting with gaming creepypastas, then lost episode pastas, to ritual pastas, and now image creepypastas. I have a few more of these in mind going forward, mainly internet creepypastas, experiment pastas, and cryptid pastas. I will likely be taking a small break from this type of video format though, as I want to try some other videos that have been sitting in my backlog for a while. I want to give a big thanks to my Patreon supporters, Blow a Nose, Nora Kingsley, Scout with a Name, and Alex Hilton. You all keep this channel going and provide me with so much support. Thank you everyone for watching this video. You all have a good night.